Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto becomes Yellow Flash in Highschool DxD part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The grand and optimistic tempo of Ode to Joy danced around in his eardrums as he closed his eyes. The music took him to a completely different universe, into a realm where he is the master of all creation. His hands guided the variations of each and every instrument before him, and the collected sound was his own experience of rediscovering the masterpiece. The perfect symphony sounded throughout his universe and filled every single crevice with wondrous music that soothed the soul and raised spirits. But the turn of the chorus, the universe was blasted with divine light, as if God himself had decided to grace them with his presence. Each percussive note in the background made up a steady and perpetual support, and the melody guided the very existence and progress of the universe. The more the dynamics changed, the more the light danced around within that universe, and it was beautiful choreographic piece on its own. But like all good things, it must end. The chorus slowly faded away, and he was pulled back into his current existence in the realm that appeared much less magnificent than his own. He slowly parted his eyes, and actual light revealed to him his orchestra. Each and every instrument in their hands was settled on their laps in resting positions, exactly as he had instructed them to do. A small smile graced his face as he looked at the also smiling faces of his band members, and they all let the thunderous sound of applause shake the building with its intensity. He turned around from his conductor podium and bowed. "Thank you for listening to us," he said with a humble yet firm voice. His spiky blonde hair shined in the almost burning skylight as he bowed, and his perfect posture was further pronounced with a well-tailored tuxedo on his body. The lustrous fabric reflected the strong fluorescent light from above, and it created an illusion of a golden aura around his body, making him look even more majestic than before. With that, he turned back towards his band and nodded, and each member of his orchestra stood in unison and walked off the stage. The applause remained strong as people started to stand up. It was the last piece of the night, and people wanted to show their admiration to the young and talented conductor. It was delightful for music enthusiasts to see new blood with such talent take interest in traditional music, masterpieces that would not involve any vulgarity or defamation. The young conductor was not performing in a 5-star concert hall yet, but with his passion and talent, his fans knew that he would make it to the top on day. Naruto-san started an old man as he walked up to the young blonde with a smile on his face. "That was just magical." The young conductor smiled and shook the man's hands. "You flatter me, sir. I just hope I was up to your standards." The Kuo Concert Hall was the largest and most grand musical facility in the small city, but it would sometimes have an occasional visit from some of the biggest stars in Japan. Naruto was a very young and new conductor that was invited to perform in the concert hall. When the original band conductor failed to commit, it was hard for him to lead an existing band, but it all turned out great, and the band really enjoyed Naruto conducting for them. "You all were wonderful, already much better than what he heard last year," exclaimed the old man who was actually the owner of the concert hall. "It is amazing that with so little time you could reform our high school band to such a glorious orchestra." Naruto smiled again and shook his head. "It is not all because of me. Every member worked very hard to meet this deadline, and they deserve just as much credit as I do." The old man laughed happily and patted Naruto on his shoulder. "You are certainly a nice young man. I am very glad that our high school got someone like you for a change." Naruto just smiled back and shook his head. "I sometimes go to your school to monitor the band, so you'll be seeing more of me there as well, which is really more of a benefit for me, since I get to see you all perform again," finished the man with another laugh. Naruto bowed again and smiled. "You are welcome to come see us every day, Kaido-san." Kaido nodded and stepped back. "I will leave you alone now. I'm betting that there are other people who would want to speak with you." With that, the old man walked away. "Thank you again, Naruto-san." Naruto relaxed his shoulder and cracked his neck as he was left alone, but when he turned back he saw a group of people walking over to him. They looked much younger than the general population of the crowd. They looked his own age. One of them were dressed in classy clothing, and they all had smiles on their faces as they walked over to him. "Hello, Naruto-san. I would just like to say that it was a terrific performance," said a gorgeous crimson-haired young woman who was wearing an elegant yet daring nightgown that left little to imagination. She had a sweet smile on her face as she offered Naruto her hand. "I am Rias Gremory. It is nice to meet you." Naruto smiled and gladly shook her hand. "Thank you very much, Rias-san, and since we haven't been properly introduced, I am Uzumaki Naruto." Rias smiled as she ended the handshake. "These are my friends from school. We all decided to come see the school orchestra perform tonight." The beauty gestured to the others behind her. "These are my underclassmen, Haidu Issei, Yudo Kiba, Asia Argento, and Kaneko Taoju." The blonde smiled at each of them and bowed. "It's very nice to meet you all." "The pleasure is ours," said Kiba, a young man who was wearing a very nice tuxedo. He also had blonde hair like Naruto, but it was a slightly lighter tone. That was beautiful. Chirped a smiling Asia as Issei and Kaneko nodded kindly. Issei stood behind Asia with a large grin. It's hard to believe that someone just 1 year older than me could conduct so well. Naruto smiled and nodded at each other them. Thank you very much. This is Himejima Akeno, continued Rias, as Naruto's eyes looked over to see a woman he thought to be even more beautiful than Rias. Instead of Western clothing, she was wearing a very elegant black kimono with red roses sewn into it. She had enchanting violet eyes and creamy white skin that looked very healthy and smooth. Her long black hair was tied into a long ponytail that reached all the way down to her legs. My best friend and classmate, finished Rias. Hello Naruto-san, that was an enchanting performance, said Akeno with a silky voice that made Naruto want to hear her sing. You are most kind, Akeno-san, and I must thank you all for coming. Naruto's eyes were locked onto Akeno's purple orbs and he felt like he has seen them somewhere before. Rias noticed that her best friend was acting a little strange, there was an unknown emotion in her eyes that she had never seen before. Akeno didn't really show it, but after living with her for the majority of her life, Rias knew when her best friend was bothered by something, but unlike most other times, she had no idea what was bothering her. Well, we won't keep you, Naruto-san, thank you again for the performance, good night. Rias said as she gestured to her friends that they were heading out and they all immediately started to step away from the stage. Of course, replied Naruto politely as he watched them leave. Perhaps I will see you all again in class. Rias smiled and nodded as she looked back at the blonde. We look forward to it. As they walked away, Akeno couldn't help but look back at the young man that she had seen somewhere before. Suddenly, her eyes widened and her hand immediately reached back to her orange ribbon that tied her hair together. It can't be. Flashback on. Ah-chan, where are you? Cried a small girl no older than the age of 4. The girl had long black hair that reached her lower back and it was flowing in the wind as she ran along the busy streets alone. Many people looked over at the cute girl as she ran past them as fast as she could. They were all concerned about her small child. It was rush hour in the city and she appeared to have been separated from her parents. The girl had some tears welling up in her eyes as she desperately scanned around trying to find her mother. The girl had her mother was visiting the big city for the city festival and they had a lot of fun, but the girl ran off after she saw someone handing out balloons. In the end, she lost the balloon person and her mother. It has already been 20 minutes since she lost her mother and she was getting very scared. Are you okay? Asked a sudden voice from behind the girl. The girl immediately turned around and saw a boy that was about her age, at least he seemed so as he was the same height as her. I don't know where my Ka-chan is. The boy tilted his head as he reached up to scratch his spiky blonde hair with a confused expression on his face. His blue eyes twinkled a little as he let out a small chuckle. I don't know where my Ka-chan is either. The little girl started to sob and she stomped the ground. I want my Ka-chan. The blonde boy, seeing how the girl was crying, started to panic a little. Hey, stuttered out the boy. Don't cry, I'll help you look for your Ka-chan before I look for my Ka-chan. The girl calmed down a little now that she was not alone and looked up at the boy. I'm Naruto, who are you? Asked the boy with all his childish innocence. The girl dried her tears and sniffed. I'm Akeno. Naruto grinned and grabbed onto the girl's hand. Well, come on, Akeno-chan, let's go find your Ka-chan. The two kids ran back towards the area where most of the parks were located, which was where Akeno was with her mother before she ran off. There were countless other kids in the parks, and luckily for them, the adults were all mainly standing at the sidelines. Akeno followed behind Naruto as she looked up at the adults, but her mother was not there. I think your Ka-chan is looking for you, so she must be around here somewhere, said Naruto as he kept walking forward. Let's go over there, suggested Akeno as she pointed over to the food stands. Maybe Ka-chan is looking for me over there. Naruto nodded and started towards that direction. Okay, let's check it out. Even though they were much smaller than the other people in the crowd, it was very hard for them to make their way around with so many adults blocking the view. Some people moved out of the way for the two kids, but there was no way that they could see anyone's face if they were so blocked in. Akeno pulled Naruto over to a line of bushes and saw that it was much less crowded on the other side. Let's go over to side. Naruto shrugged and nodded. Okay. The boy went first and crawled through the relatively loose branches between two bushes and pushed his way through as hard as he could. His clothes got caught on a little, but it was no big deal, although the same thing could not be said about Akeno. Help, my hair got caught. Naruto looked concerned about the painful expression on the girl's face and quickly leaned down to help her. Some of the girl's black hair was caught onto the small twigs of the bushes and the more she tugged, the tighter the knots became. Naruto isolated the twigs and started to snap them off one by one, and it took them another few minutes before Akeno could make it out. My hair, mumbled Akeno with a pout on her face as she plucked off stray leaves and dirt from her semi-ruined hair. Naruto grinned and helped her along and used his fingers to brush her strands back straight. Wow, your hair is really soft and silky, exclaimed the boy in amazement. My hair is always spiky and wild, no matter how hard my Ka-chan tries to comb my hair, it would always be like this. Akeno giggled at the innocent look on Naruto's face. My 2-chan's hair is like mine too, but Ka-chan never tries to comb his hair. Akeno brushed her own fingers through her hair with a smile on her face. I have the same hair as my Ka-chan, but hers is even longer than mine. Exclaimed the girl as she spread her arms out. They reach all the way down to her legs. I really like your hair, Akeno-chan, but it looks like it would get caught on things really easily. Naruto said as he placed a hand on his chin and thought. I'm not cutting my hair short. Cried the girl with a pout on her face. I want to grow my hair down to my legs, just like me Ka-chan. Okay, muttered Naruto as he looked around for some ideas. I got it. Suddenly cried the boy. Come here, Akeno-chan. Where are we going? Naruto ignored Akeno's question and ran over to one of the many stands selling goods for the town festival. It was a stand that was selling all kinds of accessories, and something caught Naruto's eyes the moment he saw them. Hey there kid, you want something? Asked a middle-aged woman as she smiled down at the two adorable kids. Naruto grinned and pointed up. Yeah, can I please get that? The lady's eyes followed Naruto's finger and saw a simple orange ribbon. This? Asked the lady. Yep. The boy excitedly handed over some of his allowance to the man and took the ribbon with a smile on his face. He quickly turned back at Akeno and walked closer to her. The girl was surprised when Naruto reached for her hair but understood what he was doing almost immediately. The boy carefully looped the ribbon around Akeno's hair and tied it into a long ponytail. He smiled brightly when he was finished. He thought the ribbon looked great along with her black hair. Well, isn't that sweet? Chirped the lady as she smiled at the cute scene. Akeno reached up and felt the smooth texture of the ribbon before she smiled at the boy. Thank you, Naruto-chan. The blonde merely smiled and waved her off. No problem. The girl then looked up at the stand herself and walked over to get a better look at the merchandise. Excuse me miss, can I get that please? Naruto was a little confused as the lady handed Akeno a little watch with a smiley face as the background. Akeno paid for the watch with some allowance that she had on her and turned back to Naruto with a smile on her face. This is for you, Naruto-chan. Chirped the girl as she grabbed the boy's hand and placed the watch on his wrist. You have the same smile as the watch. The blonde chuckled as he looked at his new watch. Thank you, Akeno-chan. Oh, the two of you are so cute. Exclaimed the middle-aged woman as she reached down to ruffle the kid's hair. Akeno smiled up at the lady and bowed a little. Thank you, Oba-san. All the while, Naruto was looking down at his watch, but then something caught his eyes. It was black hair, the exact same shade that Akeno had. He looked up and saw a woman walking a small distance from them, and she had a very worried expression on her face, which looked very familiar in Naruto's opinion. Looking back at Akeno, Naruto saw that she looked a lot like the pretty lady that just walked by, and his eyes widened at the thought. Akeno-chan. Cried the boy loudly as he grabbed his friend's hand. I think I saw your Ka-chan. Without another word, Naruto pulled Akeno along as they ran towards the direction of the worried lady. Akeno was surprised at the sudden running start but quickly ran along Naruto's side as he pulled her by the hand. She was looking ahead to see if her mother was actually there, but she couldn't recognize any of the adults ahead of them. Oh my god, there you are. Cried a sudden voice from behind the kids. Akeno quickly turned around at the loving voice. Ka-chan. Cried the girl as she ran up to her mother with teary eyes. The woman knelt down and scooped her daughter up into her arms, letting out a sigh of relief as she hugged her little girl close to her chest. The mother ran her fingers along Akeno's back as she whispered soft nothings into her ear, just happy and relieved that her little daughter was okay. Naruto stood several feet away from the happily reunited mother and daughter with a smile on his face. He was happy to see Akeno happy. Don't you ever walk away like that again, muttered the pretty lady to her daughter. Akeno nodded into her mother's shirt. I won't, I promise. Akeno's mother looked over her daughter's shoulder and saw Naruto smiling at them, so she smiled back. The mother pulled back from her hug and stood up fully, but she made sure she had a strong grasp on Akeno's hand as she walked up to Naruto. Hello there. Akeno smiled and pointed at Naruto. Ka-chan, this is Naruto-chan, he was helping me find you. Naruto waved at the older lady with a smile. Hello. Hello Naruto-kun, thank you so much for taking care of my daughter, said the woman kindly as she knelt down in front of him. I am Himejima Shuri, it's nice to meet you. Hello, I am Namikaze Naruto. Exclaimed Naruto loudly. It's nice to meet you too, Shuri Abachan. Ah-chan look. Exclaimed Akeno happily as she pulled on her mother's sleeve. Naruto-chan bought me this. Shuri smiled when she finally noticed the cute orange ribbon on her little princess's hair. It looked surprisingly elegant with her black hair. Isn't it really pretty? Shuri giggled and nodded. Yes sweetie, you look very cute with it. The mother looked back at Naruto and smiled at him. Thank you again, Naruto-kun. No problem, Akeno-chan got me this. Said the boy loudly as he pointed to his smiley face watch. Shuri smiled at the cuteness of the entire situation. That's nice, your smile is just like that smiley face. That's what I said. Cried Akeno happily. Naruto-chan, where are you? Cried a loud voice from deep within the crowd behind Naruto, Akeno and Shuri. Naruto's eyes widened and turned around. That's my Ka-chan. Exclaimed the boy before he turned back at Akeno. I have to go, thanks again for the watch, Akeno-chan. You're leaving? Asked Akeno with a sad look on her face. Yeah, if my Ka-chan gets mad at me she won't cook any ramen tonight. Replied Naruto with a devastated look on his face. See you again, Akeno-chan. Cried the boy as he ran away from the mother and daughter. Shuri looked down at her daughter and saw that she was still looking at the retreating back of Naruto. Don't worry, you'll see him again. Akeno looked up at her mother sadly, really? Shuri giggled and kissed Akeno on the cheek. Yes, sweetie, I promise. Akeno looked into the crowd and stared at the small spot where she could still see Naruto's blonde hair and she saw him jump into a red-haired woman's arms. There was also a man next to them who had the exact same hair as Naruto and Akeno assumed that he was Naruto's father. As Naruto sat in his father's arms, he looked back over at her and waved as he saw her. See you again soon, whispered Akeno as she waved back with a small smile on her face. Come on, sweetie, we have to go home, said Shuri as she pulled her daughter along, making their way to the bus stop that would lead them back to their shrine home. Akeno's eyes continued to stare at the tiny speck of blonde hair in the crowd until it disappeared from her eyes. Flashback end. Wow, so he was the one who gave you your ribbon? Cried a surprised Rias as she scooped some more ice cream into her mouth. Akeno nodded as she hugged her pillow closer to her chest. Yes, it has been 14 years since the last time I saw him, but I recognized him almost instantly. The two goddesses of Kuo Academy were having their usual Friday night chat in Ria's room, which was very large and grand. The two best friends would often share the same bed when they were kids in the underworld, and they would still occasionally have their own personal slumber party. They would spend the night chatting about anything that was on their mind. It was an escape for both of them. Rias didn't have to keep up her dignified personality as the Gremory heiress, and Akeno didn't have to act like the Onisama she was to almost everyone around her. They were both in their pajamas sitting on the large bed with a large carton of ice cream on the bedside. Rias had plowed through most of the carton while she listened to Akeno's story. She thought it was better than some of the movies she had watched. It was amazing to think that someone Akeno met so many years ago would suddenly come into her life again, especially since they live in such a small and isolated town. I've always wondered where you got that ribbon, mumbled Rias as she held her spoon between her lips. Akeno sighed as she pulled the same ribbon off her hair and held it in her hands. Since Ka-chan died I haven't really any personal possessions of my own, and after I was kicked out of the Himejima family, this was really the one thing I could call my own. Rias frowned and placed down her bowl of ice cream. Come on now, it is a long time ago. The red-haired girl scooted closer to her best friend and wrapped her arms around hers. You have all of us as your family now, and many things you can call your own. Akeno smiled and nodded. Yes, thank you, Rias. The Gremory just waved her off before a small smile came on her face. Now back to Naruto-san. Akeno could already predict what was coming next. How do you feel about him? What do you mean? Asked the black-haired girl with a sigh. Don't play dumb, you know exactly what I mean. Akeno played around with a strand of her own hair as she looked down at her lap. I don't really feel anything. I thought about him a lot when I was younger, especially after Ka-chan died, but when I met you and went to the underworld, he slipped my mind. Yeah, but he was your childhood crush, you don't just forget about him. Akeno smirked and gave Rias a look. How would you know, Rias, you never even had a childhood crush. Don't change the subject. I don't, said Akeno firmly, I don't have any feelings for him, it was just an innocent childhood crush. Rias smiled and nodded. I see, but he's going to be in the same school as us now, you probably see him every day. What are you saying, Rias? I'm just wondering if you will come to like him again. Chirped Rias, reverting back to her childish personality that she will only show to Akeno. He's exactly your type, a handsome, smart, but gentle man you can push around as you please. How do you know he's like that at all? Asked Akeno, amused. I'm good at reading people. Akeno sighed and looked at the ribbon in her hand again. Rias, if the death of my mother taught me anything, it's that the supernatural should not associate with normal humans, it may cause them their death. Shuri wouldn't have died if Akeno's father's enemies didn't come after them because of him. I am a devil now, and my potential enemies might go after my precious people to get to me, so if I was to ever find a boyfriend, I want him to be stronger than me, so he could protect himself and me. Rias nodded in understanding. I can see your reason behind that. Naruto-san is just a regular human, he will live a human lifespan, but will live on for thousands of years, so starting anything with him would just end in heartbreak. Well, when you reach the rank of high-class devil, you will get your own evil pieces, and you can turn him into your queen. Akeno smiled and nudged Rias a little. When did you become a matchmaker? Rias giggled and rested her head on Akeno's shoulder. I just thought you and Naruto-san would make a lovely couple, and your story together will be so cute. I haven't seen this side of you since we left the underworld. The attacker Rias-sama is back. That reminds me, said Rias as she reached into her drawer and pulled out a stack of DVDs. Issei brought these to me today. Apparently a client of his gave it to him in return for his services. Akeno looked at the DVDs and raised an eyebrow and thought, fairy tale. Rias nodded as she took the first disc and popped it into her DVD player. Yeah, apparently it's a very good anime. It has mages and dragons in it. Rias smiled as she snuggled into the blankets. It's been a long time since we've watched some anime together, so I thought we'd give it a try. The black-haired beauty smiled and nodded. Sure, it sounds interesting enough. The kingdom of Fiori, just beyond the perimeter of Kuo Academy, was a small condo building. It only had 6 stories and 2 homes on each floor, and on the top floor on the right side was a home that was still active deep into the night. I know I have it somewhere here, muttered Naruto as he dug his way through stacks upon stacks of sheet music. The condo was relatively small, but was perfect for one person living in it. It was about 500 sq.ft. It had 1 full kitchen, 1 bathroom, 1 bedroom, and relatively efficient living space. Naruto had been living in a hotel until 2 days ago, so his luggage was still all over the place. There were many boxes along the side of the home, and only 1 out of 10 were not labeled as music. Naruto was still dressed in a part of his tuxedo. The jacket was on the couch, but his silk shirt was pulled up to the elbow, and his black slacks were covered in dust. He had gone through most of his boxes, but as luck would have it, he still couldn't find what he was looking for. Hey, mumbled the young man as he lifted a heavy stack of papers from his Mozart box. There you are. It was a watch that had a smiley face as its background. Naruto placed it around his wrist and found that he had to use the last hole just to stretch it on. The last time he changed the batteries for it was ages ago, so it was no wonder that it was not moving, but he felt very nostalgic at the sight of it. He could still remember how moved he was when that little girl gave him the watch. She had been his childhood crush for a long time. I wonder why I never threw this away, thought Naruto as he sat down on his couch. Even after Tu-chan and Ka-chan passed away, this was one of the few things I kept. The blonde had a smile on his face as he tapped the face of the watch. He wasn't really sure if the Akeno he met at the performance was the same little girl he met all those years ago, but he knew that they both have the same shade of black hair. There was even an orange ribbon on the young woman's hair, but it would be hard to believe that she would keep such a cheap gift for so many years. Was that really Akeno-chan? Naruto asked himself silently. I never thought I would see her again after so long. Suddenly, some knocking on his front door broke Naruto out of his stupor. His brow furrowed in confusion. It was already 2 o'clock in the morning. Who could possibly be at his door at such an hour? He silently stood from his couch and walked over to the door and opened it ever so slowly. There were 2 people standing on his doorstep and they were dressed very peculiarly. Sorry to bother you so late at night, but we just arrived in this country and were ordered to consult with you, Naruto-senpai, said one of the 2 people. Naruto opened the door fully and smiled. I didn't expect you to arrive so early. Please come in, Irina-san, Zenobia-san. The 2 young ladies walked into the room with their white hooded cloaks. It seems that the church is really trying to get the Excalibur blades back, said Naruto as he closed the door. Irina grinned and nodded. Yep, they sent us here as fast as possible. Well, it's an honor working with 2 holy sword users, Naruto said politely as Irina smiled back. Zenobia shook her head and bowed to Naruto. No, it is an honor for us to be working with the strongest exorcist. Please guide us, Naruto-senpai. Naruto smirked. I will try my best. Naruto watched on in amusement as his 2 subordinates wolfed down the large amount of food he had ordered for them. It was funny to think that 2 holy sword warriors coming from one of the wealthiest organizations in the world would not have any money for food. He himself had access to some of the Vatican's accounts and he could use the money inside as long as it relates to his mission in Japan, but no one would mind if he bought a new grand piano for himself. Thank you, senpai, exclaimed Irina in between chewing and swallowing. I love these family restaurants. Zenobia nodded quickly before she grabbed a plate of omelette rice. Yes, this country's food is heavenly, thank you, Naruto-senpai. The blonde rested his back against the seat as he sipped on his own iced tea. No problem, remind you to transfer some money to your account so you would be able to buy food for the rest of your mission. I can't be seen eating with you 2 so often. Oh senpai, you are an angel, exclaimed Irina happily as Naruto chuckled. No, just an exorcist. Zenobia polished off her plate and grabbed another. We will now be able to fight at full strength. Naruto chuckled again as he shook his head. With the money I give you, please go and get some normal clothes. We don't want everyone in town to think the 2 of you are crazy. Irina nodded a little confused but was going to follow orders either way. Also, Zenobia-san, please try to find some sort of case to put your holy sword in. People are moving away from you in the streets because of the size of that thing. The blue-haired girl looked at her blade a little confused. But I don't have a case for it. I think I have a spare cello case at home. I'll get it for you later. Zenobia wiped her lips and bowed until her forehead touched the table. Thank you again, Naruto-senpai, we would be lost without your leadership. Remember, started Naruto more seriously than before. I am only here as a last resort, I will only interfere if the two of you are in danger or are unable to continue the mission, so make sure to report every detail to me as you find them. Hi, senpai. Replied the two girls in unison. Naruto nodded as he crossed his arms. Now, I believe you both already know of the small group of devils that resides in this town. Zenovia nodded seriously. Hi, there is the heiress of the Gremory family and the heiress of the Satiri family. Irina nodded along at her partner's words. They both have their own peerages, and the Gremory heiress has the Securitate as her pawn. The blonde nodded. Yes, I ran into them just last night at my recital. The Gremory girl does appear to be quite strong for her age, but it's nothing to be worried about. Naruto looked over at Zenovia and leaned further into the table. Set up a meeting with Sona Satiri and Rias Gremory and tell them both about our current mission in town. This is something between us and the fallen angels, so it would be best for them to stay out of the entire ordeal. Irina nodded. Okay. It was also mentioned in your report that you personally know the Securitate, Irina-san. Hi, he was my childhood friend back when I lived in this town, but he was just an ordinary boy back then. Irina had a small pout on her face as she poked the table. I didn't know he was going to be turned into a devil. Yeah, I know how you feel. Before Irina could question him about what he meant, he continued. But anyways, I am going to be a student in Kuo Academy for the time being, and I have suppressed my powers to the bare minimum, so the devils can't sense me, so any sort of fighting would be carried out by the two of you. Naruto pulled out two small pieces of paper and gave each of his subordinates one. If either one of you find yourself in a dire emergency, channel some magic into these, and I will come help immediately. Zenovia smiled at the piece of paper with some sort of seal on it. Ah, this must be Naruto-senpai's infamous teleportation spell. Irina's eyes were twinkling in excitement as she looked down at the piece of paper. With this spell, senpai destroyed 150 fallen angels on his own and got the moniker Kiroi Senko. Naruto smirked and chuckled. Yes, but you must only use them in emergencies. Remember, I am only here as a last resort. The name of the Kiroi Senko and the strongest exorcist had been heard too often lately, and the church didn't want to attract too much attention to him. It would be bad if the devils and fallen angels band together to terminate Naruto. Zenovia bowed again as she smiled at Naruto. We won't let you down, Naruto-senpai. Hi, we'll get the swords back safe and sound. Naruto smiled back and nodded. Good, now let's get some dessert. He only chuckled more when he saw the delighted smiles on the girls' faces. Back in Kuo Academy, Akeno was acting out her usual routine of preparing snacks and drinks for her club members. It was Saturday, and according to her own personal schedule, she was supposed to bake some chocolate chip cookies, which were Kaneko's favorite. The one Isama of the Occult Research Club had a smile on her face as she pulled a tray of freshly baked cookies out from the oven, but it looked as if she was forcing the smile on her face. Akeno felt lucky that there was no school today and she could waste a day by doing perfunctory tasks. Ever since she saw Naruto again after so long, she hadn't been able to concentrate on anything. The girl tried her best to convince herself that she had no feelings for Naruto, and it was partially true. She had no romantic feelings for him at the moment, but she really wanted to meet up with him just to find out what he has been doing for the past 14 years. As Akeno placed the cookies onto a nice plate, her mind wandered in her memories of the previous night. The concert was very good, and she thought that before she realized the conductor was her childhood crush, but she really wanted to know how Naruto turned into such a scholastic young man. From what she could remember of Naruto, he was a loud, cheerful, and hyperactive boy. She wondered if something drastic had happened to him to cause him to change so much. Hey everyone, let's have some snacks. Chirped Akeno with a smile as she pushed her snack cart into the meeting room. I made your favorite, Kaneko-chan. The petite white-haired girl jumped from her seat and grabbed several cookies in one go. Thank you, Akeno-senpai, said Kaneko with more emotion than normal. You're welcome. Akeno made a steaming cup of tea and placed it on Ria's desk. Here you go, Butchu. Ria smiled at her queen and nodded. Thanks, Akeno. Akeno smiled back and stood behind Ria's as she would usually do. The club president skimmed through a stack of papers on her desk and smiled at her servants. This has been a good month, said Ria's happily. Akeno made 11 contracts, Kaneko made 10, Yudo made 8, and Asia made 3. Hiba smiled at the new bishop and nodded. Amazing, Asia-san, you are certainly getting the hand of being a devil. Yeah, you're doing great, Asia-chan. Exclaimed Issei happily as he wrapped his arm around Asia's shoulders. But Issei, you didn't make any contracts this month, said Rias as she looked at her pawn sharply. If this continues, I will has Asia teach you a few things. I'm sorry, Buchou, cried the young man with tears falling from his eyes. As the usual meeting went on like it would go every day, Akeno's mind was being pulled to another place. Much to her own frustration, she kept wondering what Naruto's life was like in the past 14 years. Did he go to music school? Did he travel to other countries? Did he keep the watch she gave him? Did he have a girlfriend? There was virtually no reason for Akeno to think about such trivial things, at least it was what she tried to convince herself of, but her curiosity was getting to her nerves. Life really had its own way of showing irony and amusement. Back when Akeno was kicked out of her family and was alone on the streets, she often thought about Naruto and how he would come out of nowhere and help her find her mother again. The blonde boy became an imaginary escape Akeno had from reality, and even though she had only associated with him for half an hour at most, he became one of the most important people in her life. Akeno wouldn't be able to count how many times she dreamt about Naruto finding her when she was alone, but fate was cruel enough to let her see Naruto again when she no longer needed him to rescue her. Akeno closed her eyes and sighed as silently as she could. All the things Rias said to her the previous night had also been bothering her. Akeno knew full well that the Naruto in her mind wasn't the actual Naruto, he was only an image she created by her mind as someone who could potentially rescue her from her loneliness. Akeno could still remember many of the scenarios she imagined back when she was still alone, and most of them involved Naruto coming in to save her like Prince Charming. A small smile came onto Akeno's lips as she shook her head at the thought. I doubt he even remembers me. I was just a girl he met 14 years ago for half an hour, only a fool like me would think so much about this. Akeno, said the sudden voice of Rias. Akeno jolted from her position as she was pulled from her stupor. Why yes. Muttered out the girl as she looked down at her master. Are you okay? Asked Rias looking concerned. You were really spacing out for a moment. The queen compassed herself and nodded. Yes but you, sorry about that, I had something on my mind. Rias had a good hunch on what was bothering her best friend, but decided to speak with her about it when they were alone. Okay now let's continue. Akeno forced herself to pay attention to the meeting, but it was getting harder and harder by the second. Tonight we'll all meet at the old warehouse, we have to destroy the strait tonight. Hi, but you. Replied everyone in unison, including Akeno. Maybe a good battle will take my mind off this, thought Akeno as she closed her eyes again. Naruto had his eyes closed as he took in the variety of sounds that rushed into his ears. The fishing rod in his hands was being gently pulled by the river water, and the vibrations that ran through the rod made a nice tempo for his natural symphony. The wind blowing through the leaves were his flutes, the birds chirping were his brass, the light vibrations were his percussion, and the fishing rod in his hands was his baton. A small smile graced the young man's face as he harmonized the natural sounds with a soft hum of his own. Although he was supposed to be in class right now, Naruto couldn't help but spend some quality time with such natural delight. The sunlight felt warm on his skin as the light wind cooled him to perfection. Fishing was just an appetizer. Oh, I didn't know youngsters like yourself like to fish, said a man beside Naruto with a casual tone. I'm happy the next generation will carry on this wonderful hobby. The man had his eyes locked onto the river, never once did he look over to Naruto as he spoke. I came here for the serenity, but fishing is certainly one of my favorite pastimes, replied Naruto just as casually as he looked at the man through the corner of his eyes. The first thing Naruto noticed was the man's hair, it was mostly back, but he had golden bangs hanging from his forehead. Naruto felt something from the man, but he couldn't exactly put his finger on it, it was as if the man was hiding his something from him. Well you have good eyes, this is one of the best fishing spots in the city. The man sighed lightly as he readjusted his sitting position. I usually catch at least one here every day. Really? Asked Naruto with a small smile. That's impressive. The man sighed again as he leaned back on his left hand. Well this is a small town with almost no pollution, so the rivers are very bountiful. Naruto absent-mindedly nodded at his words. But lately many people have been coming into this small town, which is very interesting since there really isn't much here. Naruto was beginning to sense a subliminal message, but decided to ignore it for the moment. Tourists are always good for towns, they bring in extra money, new insights. With all these new people this town will become a large epicenter. A soft chuckle was heard as the man looked over at Naruto. Yes, that is what I'm concerned about. The man adjusted his fishing rod a little before he looked back down at the river. We get some tourists every now and then, but for the Vatican to send their most powerful soldier here now, that is something very interesting. Naruto closed his eyes and smirked. I knew there was something odd about you, but to think that someone of your caliber would reside in such a desolate town. The blonde rested his fishing rod on the ground and used his foot to keep it in place. What is it about this place? Is there some form of magic rendering this place into a supernatural gathering place? The man chuckled again as he looked over at the young man. Well not really, I like it here because it is quiet and I can focus on my research, but one question, do you really know who I am? Well it really isn't that hard to guess. To be able to sense who I am with my powers suppressed to this level, you can only be a few people. Naruto sighed and rested back on his elbows. Given that our mission here is to retrieve something the fallen angels took from us, it would be safe to assume that you are one of the leaders of the Grigori. The man smiled and nodded. And the fact that you are here fishing while the church is hot on your tail suggests that you are not Kokabiel. He is nowhere powerful enough to be relaxing, so I'm going to take a wild guess and say you are Azazel, the governor of the fallen angels. The man laughed light-heartedly and also placed his fishing rod on the ground. To think that someone so young would already be so integrated into the world, you really are something, Kiroi Senko-san. Thank you, Azazel-san, but let me ask you, how did you sense me? The governor smiled a little as he reached into his kimono. You did suppress your aura to the bare minimum, but it still has your distinct signature, the same signature you left in Spain a few years ago. Azazel revealed a bottle of sake and 2 small plastic cups. It wasn't hard after all that the man poured the liquor into the cups and handed one to Naruto. Naruto accepted the cup with a nod and downed the drink in one go. So you were in Spain 3 years ago? Yes, and I must admit that it was a very impressive display of power. Naruto seemed emotionless as he let the man continue to speak. It's not every day that a boy can destroy an entire army of yokai using only one spell. The battle was not recorded in any document, but almost everyone in the supernatural world knew of it. It spoke of a young exorcist who destroyed a yokai army of 300 by himself. His movements were so quick he killed every single one of his enemies in just 3 minutes. The spectators of the battle gave the young exorcist a name. Kiroi Senko. I'm flattered. It is also not every day that the governor of the fallen angels praises someone. Azazel chuckled and shook his head. But I was a little disappointed that time. Why? Naruto asked as he poured himself another drink. Because I was hoping to see you use your actual power, not just your teleportation spell. Azazel focused his eyes on Naruto as he said that. You are human, and no matter how talented or well-trained you are, it would not be possible for you to emit such a powerful aura at the time, so I know you have a sacred gear of some sort. Azazel narrowed his eyes. A very powerful one. Naruto smirked as he enjoyed the stinging drink. Is this why you confronted me today? Asked the young man casually. I thought you were here to discuss matters regarding the stolen Excalibur blades and Kokabiel. Those things don't really interest me. I am more of a sacred gear enthusiast, so I am much more interested in your real power. I'm sorry, Azazel-san, but I am not obligated to say anything about my powers, Naruto said with an amused smile on his face. But if Kokabiel is strong enough to force me to save my subordinates, then you might see me use it. Oh please. Exclaimed Azazel with a friendly laugh. Kokabiel is not strong enough to force you to use your sacred gear. Well, that is not my problem, but you can always send stronger foe to fight me if you really want to see my power, but I wouldn't recommend it. Naruto muttered after another drink. I am really not one to enjoy fighting. I'd much rather stay at home and write up some new scores. With a sigh, Naruto reeled his line back in and packed up his things. This sake is really good, thank you, and if the next time we see each other is another friendly encounter, I would gladly share a glass of vintage Italian wine I brought with me. Azazel smiled and nodded. Thank you, I might hold you to that offer. The fallen angel watched as Naruto walk away from the river. Hey. Naruto stopped and looked back through the corner of his eyes. Yes. What is your name? I don't want to keep calling you Kiroi Senko. I am Naruto. With that, he walked away and disappeared into the distance. Maelstrom, huh? I have a feeling that Volley would love to meet him. The final bell had rung throughout the many hallways of Kuo Academy, and it marked the end of classes. Students happily ran out of their prisons and chatted loudly as they made their way to their lockers. It was a Monday, so school seemed extra lengthy and boring to most people, and the bell was like a message sent from heaven. Though one person was walking particularly slower than everyone else, and she had a rather depressed expression on her. Akeno, are you alright? Asked a concerned Rias as she walked up to her best friend. You've been in a stupor the whole day. The black-haired beauty gave Rias a small smile and nodded. Yes, I'm just tired. The Grimoire nodded rather reluctantly and led Akeno over to a vending machine. Come on, let's get you a cold drink. Akeno followed after her friend, but was back in her thoughts almost immediately after. A nice iced tea will wake you up a bit, said Rias as she inserted some coins into the machine. Here, drink this. Akeno took the can into her hand and felt its coldness against her palm, but her eyes glazed over when she saw the smiley face right in the middle of the can. Rias saw what her queen was looking at and sighed. Come on Akeno, stop this or you'll go crazy. Akeno shook her head and looked back at her best friend. I'm fine. She looked back down at the can and sighed a little at the yellow smiley face. It's just that, do I still look like that when I smile? Asked a sudden voice from behind Akeno and Rias, and they both looked back to see Naruto smiling at them. The young blonde was wearing the winter uniform for the school, and it looked quite well on him. If the girls passing by were of any indication, Rias would usually only see them act like that around Kiba. It's you. Exclaimed Rias a little louder than she would have liked. Naruto maintained his smile and nodded. Yes, it's nice to see you again, Rias, and the blonde looked back over at Akeno and looked into her confused and dazed eyes. I'll ask again, do I still look like that when I smile? A small smile involuntarily came onto Akeno's face as she nodded. Yes, Naruto-chan. It's great to see you again, Akeno-chan. Rias stood beside Akeno for support as the latter stepped closer to Naruto. So you remember me? Naruto nodded as his smile grew brighter. Yes, I didn't recognize you at first since you've become even more beautiful than before, but that orange ribbon on your head confirmed everything. Akeno giggled and gave a small nod. Thank you, it seems that you have changed a lot also. The blonde nodded. Yes, I have. Rias decided that she really was getting in the way of the two, so she stepped back. Hey, I have something to do in the clubroom, so I'll leave you two alone. Akeno looked over at Rias a little surprised, but the Grimoire just smiled at her. I'll take care of everything today, just go catch up. With that, Rias ran down the stairs, not giving Akeno any chance to argue. Naruto chuckled a little before he looked back at Akeno. So Akeno-chan, how about we go have a drink and catch up? Akeno smiled in the end and threw away her canned iced tea. Sure Naruto-chan, I would love that. Please follow me, Sato-san told me of a nice cafe just next to the school. Akeno nodded and followed him with a smile. But one thing first, can you please not call me Naruto-chan? Akeno giggled again and nodded. Sure, is Naruto-kun okay? Perfect. The cafe close to the school was actually very nice in Naruto's opinion. It was an open-air cafe with quite a few tables spread out between a very nice organization of plants and flowers. The tables and chairs were not unlike ones he would see back in Italy, and they play some soft classical music in the background, which made everything better in Naruto's mind. It appeared to be quite a popular place among students. Looking around, almost every one of the other tables was filled with people wearing cool uniforms. Some people were looking over at Naruto and Akeno with widened eyes, probably because it was not every day that one of the goddesses of the school would be accompanied by a young man. Naruto ignored everyone around completely and pulled out a chair for Akeno before she sat. Thank you, Naruto-kun. You're welcome. The waitress walked over to the two with a nice smile. Hello there, what can I get for you today? I'll have an iced tea please. What about you, Akeno-chan? I'll have the same. As the waitress left their table, Naruto immediately looked over at Akeno and their eyes met. He had thought about finding Akeno again countless times before, and he had thought of many scenarios, all in which he would try to be as cool as possible, but for some reason he couldn't think of anything to say at the moment. Akeno was, in some ways, the same as he remembered her, like her silky hair and pretty violet eyes, but her entire demeanor changed a lot since then. She appeared to be more elegant and mature, which was expected with the coming of age, but there was also a subtle hint of something he couldn't put a finger on. Naruto had thought about just pretending to not recognize Akeno and leave things the way they were. It would be a very weird and awkward friendship. He had become an exorcist, the most powerful one at that, and Akeno had become a devil. It was a shock to Naruto that his childhood crush had somehow been resurrected as a devil, most likely by the Grimoire girl, but he was sure that was an explanation behind it. He wanted to know what happened to Akeno after the parted all those years ago. So how have you been? Asked Akeno, breaking the silence. Naruto smiled at her without breaking eye contact. I've been good, just moving from town to town performing. Akeno smiled and nodded back, but had trouble asking about anything else. The girl berated herself inwardly as she bit into the side of her mouth. She had thought about speaking with Naruto the entirety of the previous night, but she didn't expect the situation to be so awkward. She didn't want to bring up anything that would lead them to talk about their parents or anything that would lead to the fact that she was a devil. You started, Naruto softly as he leaned forward. You still have the orange ribbon on you never threw it away. No, it really has become a part of my daily life. Akeno said very genuinely with a smile gracing her lips. Well, I still have this. Naruto pulled up his sleeve and revealed a very childish looking watch with a smiley face as its background. It barely fit on Naruto's wrist, its black band was being stretched a little, but it was still ticking. Oh my, you still wear that? Asked Akeno with a giggle. Naruto laughed heartedly as he nodded. I don't usually wear it, but I always take it to a shop every 6 months to keep the batteries from dying. The blonde smiled down at the watch and patted it with his finger. I always make sure to smile like it. He held his wrist next to his face and grinned exactly like the smiley face. Akeno giggled harder at that and shook her head. Okay, you haven't changed as much as I thought. The mood suddenly became much more relaxing and casual, and both were very glad because of it. Your smile and hair still look the same as before. Really? Asked the young man with smile. I thought my hair is less messy now. Nope, it's just the same as before. Chirped Akeno happily. But it still looks cute. Naruto chuckled and wiggled his brow. Well, thank you. The waitress came back with a tray on her hand and placed down the 2 iced teas on the table. Naruto and Akeno both reached for theirs with a smile on their faces. So you've become a conductor, how did that happen? Well, I have always loved music and it just sort of caught on, said Naruto as he sipped on his tea. I helped out a large church orchestra back in Rome, and when I transferred back here, Sato-san asked me to help with the school band. Akeno lightly sipped on her straw and nodded. It was amazing how the school band had improved so much compared to last year. Naruto chuckled. Yeah, I heard, Sato-sen was pretty mad at the previous band teacher. So how is this going to work? You are going to be a student and the school conductor. The blonde nodded as he rested his elbows on the table. Pretty much, I spent today organizing my schedule with the headmaster, so everything should work out fine. Naruto then had a smile on his face as he leaned in further. I'm also going to be in your class. Apparently I was already placed in another class, but headmaster suddenly decided to switch me into the other class. Rias thought Akeno as she just responded with a smile. Perfect. For the next few hours until sundown, the two old friends continued to chat in the small cafe. It has been a very long time since either of them had a normal conversation. They felt like they were normal humans again. Both of them stayed away from things like religion, supernatural discussions, and parents, but more and more topics came rushing out. By the end of the day, they had more iced tea than they ever had before. So muttered Rias with a sly grin on her face. How was your date with Naruto-san? Akeno sighed as she untied her orange ribbon and placed it on her dresser. It was not a date, Rias the black-haired girl turned back to look at her best friend. We were just catching up, please don't make a big deal out of this. The red-haired girl pulled Akeno to her bed and sat her down. Catching up doesn't take 5 hours, you know. So we also had dinner, but it was only because he was a gentleman and wanted to make sure I eat on time. The sun had set a few hours ago, and Akeno had returned to her room in the old schoolhouse. Rias was waiting for her the moment she stepped into the building, and since then the king had been firing question and question at her queen. Akeno didn't even have time to answer any of Ria's questions, with the latter asking something every 2 seconds. Where'd you guys go for dinner? Asked Rias with a smile. Akeno shrugged off her blouse and stretched her arms a little, nowhere special, just a little Italian place down the street. The queen took off her bra before she reached a hand back to massage her shoulder. It was a very nice dinner, but there were some Kuo students in the restaurant and they kept looking over at us. Well, you can't blame them, it's not every day they see their Akeno Onasama having dinner alone with a man. Akeno threw on a simple white t-shirt that barely covered her black panties and slid into the bed. Why are you so interested in this, Rias? Rias also slid into the bed and hugged a pillow to chest. Of course I'm interested, in the 12 years that we've been living together, this is the first time I've seen you react to a man. Akeno smiled a little as Rias hooked her arms around her queen's own. I thought you hate men, but Naruto-san seems to affect you a lot. Well, you always say that all men are the same, but you seem to be getting along very well with the Seikun. Come on, Akeno, I'm a little worried about you. Akeno saw the concern in her best friend's eyes and looked down at her hands. I'm interested in Naruto-kun because he is one of the very few people who I held very close to my heart before I met you. Rias looked much more serious than before as she continued to listen. He was a person that made me feel safe, and when I was alone on the streets, I would often imagine that he was with me and would protect me from anything. Akeno brought her knees closer to her chest and hugged them. He became my imaginary guardian angel, one of my most important and precious people. Rias remained silent for a few seconds as she pulled Akeno closer to her. So you've basically conjured up a fake Naruto in your mind. Akeno nodded. Yeah, and now I really want to get to know the real him. I never knew you had to resort to such things. It was hard, Rias whispered Akeno softly. I was only 6 years old back then, and I lived on the streets for a year. Rias hugged Akeno closer so as to comfort her as much as possible. The thought of having Naruto with me gave me strength, without him I probably would have gave up before you found me. So how is the real Naruto? Akeno actually smiled a little and nodded. He's actually not that different than before, he still acts very cheerful and smiles just like he used to. Rias clearly saw the emotions running through Akeno's eyes as she spoke about the blonde. I don't know why, but he has a certain aura to him that makes me feel safe, but that is most likely my mind playing tricks on me. Rias sighed as she pulled back from the hug and held Akeno by her shoulders. Listen Akeno, I've saved up my other knight and rook pieces, and if you really want Naruto-san to stay with you, I will turn him into a devil for you. Akeno stayed silent as she looked to the side. I can tell that he's very important to you and don't want to see you hurt when he lives out his life as a human. He is very important to me, but I don't want to pull him into our world. Akeno said this with the softest whisper. He is a human living a happy and successful life. I don't want to be the one who changes everything in his life because of my own selfish reasons. Akeno Rias whispered back. We are devils, it is in our nature to be selfish. I know, replied the black-haired girl softly. He might be mad at you in the beginning, but you will have thousands of years to be together after that. Rias reached down and grasped Akeno's hands with her own. If he really is someone who is that precious to you, then I can guarantee that you will regret it later on if you don't do this. Akeno was deep in thought as she looked down at her and Rias entwined hands. You're my sister in everything but blood, Akeno, and I want you to be happy. Akeno looked up at her king with some tears in her eyes. Okay, turn him into a devil. She said with a small sob as she pulled Rias into a hug. I want to keep him in my life. Rias likewise wrapped her arms around her queen and gently rubbed her back. "I'll resurrect him as soon as possible. I'm sure he'll be a nice addition to our family." "Thank you, Rias." Naruto had attended several schools back in Italy, and they have all been high-class private schools with very strict curriculums. They were all owned and operated by the clergy and sponsored by Vatican City, so prayer and mass were very important and had been integrated into every student's life. Naruto could still remember waking up every morning to hundreds of children praying in unison and to the grand organ in the church playing its morning hymns. The Kiroi Senko never really had to attend any classes for participate in formal student body events, but he did enjoy the occasional lecture. He could still remember how he felt empowered when he, along with all the other students, would pray together in St. Peter's Square. It was as if God was standing right above them and their voice pierced the heavens. But soon Naruto found out that it was all for nothing. With his rise through the ranks, Naruto quickly became privy to many secrets of the church and heaven, and he sometimes would rather to not know some of them. The acquired knowledge did make the world appear much simpler and transparent in Naruto's eyes, but it also robbed him of a large portion of his drive. The devotion he had towards God and his eternal love had turned out to be nothing but a hopeless cry to an abyss. But either way, the world was still spinning. Naruto had come to accept the fact that they were now lost sheep with a dead shepherd, and it would be their own responsibility to create order out of chaos. With this end, Naruto had completed countless missions for the church before he was even 15, and by the time he was 17, he was already one of the highest-ranking powers in Vatican City. Not a bishop or cardinal, but just a simple exorcist, an extremely powerful and infamous exorcist, but just an exorcist nonetheless. Naruto wanted to take part in helping the angels fill in God's shoes, and he would do what he does best in order to help, though in recent years he had begun to grow tired of the constant fighting. "Man, I am thinking like one of the old men back home," thought Naruto to himself as he shook his head. "I am only 18 years old, I need to live my life without thinking about everyone else for once." The blonde was making his way down one of the many grand hallways of Kuo Academy and towards the cafeteria to get a nice lunch. It was his second day in school and his first day in class. It was quite enjoyable and certainly a much needed change in scenery, but it wasn't as enjoyable as Naruto originally expected. One big reason was that Akeno was absent. Naruto had a very nice time with Akeno the previous day. He couldn't even remember the last time he had a normal conversation with someone that wasn't intimidated by him. Back in Vatican City, everyone would speak to him as if he was their general, and those who didn't like him would just plain ignore him. Either way, nobody wanted to piss him off. It was either people kissing up to him or people avoiding him. There was no actually friendly contact. Meeting with Akeno again was a huge breath of fresh air, even though she was a devil. "Boy, say, stop walking like a zombie," cried a make student with a thin buzz-cut haircut. He was walking with another young man with a pair of thick lens glasses and Rias Grimory's pawn, the Securite, Haidu say. They were the three perverts of Kuo Academy. It was one of the few things Naruto had learned about the student body within the first hour in the school. "What's up with you, did you not sleep last night or something?" asked the other young man who had glasses. "No, I'm just tired," replied the brown-haired young man. The buzz-cut young man, whose name was supposedly Mitsuda, grinned. "Why, were you too busy thinking about groping Rias-senpai and Akeno-senpai's tits?" But those words, Naruto stopped in his tracks. His golden bangs hung over his forehead and hid his eyes from the people around him, but if one was to look very closely, they would be able to see a slight twitch in his fingers. Issei smirked and shook his head. "The two of you are naive, it is not just about groping." "What are you talking about?" asked Motohama, the young man wearing glasses, with a slight hitch in his voice. "I have a new goal now," started Issei as he looked at his friends with a very determined expression. "I am going to suck on their Motohama," and Mitsuda looked like they were going to spew blood from their nose at any moment. "I want to taste them both as they moan out in pleasure, oh, the glorious taste of their oppai." Mitsuda had tears in his eyes as he balled his fists. "If you actually manage to suck on those babies, I will literally worship you." "Me too," cried Motohama. Issei chuckled and nodded. "I'll be sure to tell you now they taste." Suddenly, there was a slight buildup of wind in the hallway and Issei felt himself being lifted into midair. Before he could cry out in shock and before his friends could react, he was suddenly flung towards the closest window and broke through it. A loud clang of the glass breaking almost covered the cries of Issei as he was launched out the fifth-floor window. "Why, a gust of wind." "Issei!" cried both Motohama and Mitsuda in shock as their friend fell from the window. Issei was crying out in fear as his body twisted in midair and he felt as if their air was guiding him towards a certain direction, which was a very large oak tree with very thick branches. The Securite had his arms and legs flailing around as he fell, and his legs were spread wide apart as his body finally shifted to the right position. A loud resounding bang was heard as Issei landed on one of the trucks on the trees, with his crotch landing first. The pawn felt as if his testicles were shot up to his throat and he fell to the ground barely conscious. "Help, someone get Asia." Under many layers of loud conversation and exclamations, Naruto's dark chuckle was completely hidden as he continued his way to get his lunch. On his way through the halls, Naruto saw many of his band members, and they all bowed or nodded at him. The blonde smiled back, but did not stop to converse with any of them. Seeing how things were progressing, he would be returning to Vatican City soon, so it would be pointless to create more ties in Kuo Academy. The cafeteria was very crowded, which was not surprising since everyone would have the same lunch period. Through the loud chatter and distinct clinking of dishes, Naruto lined up in a very long time as he looked up at the menu. It was a long menu with a lot of variety, which was nice. I'm guessing the devils have jurisdiction over this school. This town is way too small to have such a rich and grand school. Hey, Naruto-kun. Chirped a sudden voice from next to the blonde. Akeno-chan. Said the man in surprise. I thought you were absent today. I was just a little tired in the morning, so I decided to skip my first 2 classes. Akeno saw that there were already a few people lined up behind Naruto, but she smiled at them. Excuse me, is it okay if I cut in here? Oh, of course it is, said the young man directly behind Naruto with a small blush on his face. Thank you, Akeno said with her usual kind smile. Naruto smiled at the sway Akeno had with the other students, especially the males. It wasn't all that surprising, since anyone would be faltered by such a beauty. It seemed that Akeno made a very good devil. She was beautiful and seductive, 2 of the most traditional factors of God's worst enemies. What was all the commotion back there? Asked Akeno as she pointed back towards the direction of their classroom. There was a crowd near the windows and many girls were laughing about it. I'm not sure, I didn't see anything. Naruto said with a light shrug. So what do you want for lunch? Just something simple. The line actually moved quite fast, considering the amount of people that were lined up behind it. It was Naruto's turn within 3 minutes. I'll have a large miso ramen please. Akeno giggled a little as she just grabbed a small sandwich. You really still have a ramen addiction, huh? Naruto grinned as he took the tray from the lunch lady. Yeah, old habits die hard. The 2 childhood friends walked over to one of the far tables, but they couldn't help but notice many pairs of lingering eyes staring at them. It has only been 2 days since Naruto had started to attend Kuo Academy, and the rumors were already flying about him and Akeno secretly being lovers. He had also become a very popular topic among the students. Both the females and the males wanted to know how he managed to woo one of the goddesses of Kuo Academy so easily. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun, but just ignore them. Akeno said as she sat down and rested her arms on the table. Naruto smiled and nodded. Okay. They are just not used to seeing me eat alone with a man. Akeno said with a smile as she unwrapped her sandwich. I usually only eat alone with Rias or in a large group with everyone in my club. While I am much honored to get such a distinguished privilege, Akeno-sama. Exclaimed Naruto with a large grin. Akeno giggled again. Oh, stop it. Hey, I heard from the other students that our remaining 2 classes are just working periods. Do you just want to skip them? Asked Naruto with an innocent look in his eyes. With a giggle, Akeno nodded. Sure, I didn't really want to do them anyway. Let's go walk around town. I'll show you all the landmarks and fun places. Sounds heavenly. The small town had many neighborhoods and almost all of them were built in the same style. Most houses were 2 stories tall and ranged from behind 1500 SQ feet to 2000 SQ feet. These were simple Japanese homes for simple Japanese people, but there was one house deep in the suburbs that looked slightly different from the others. The exterior of the house looked more Western and lacked the traditional Japanese portions. The interior was entirely different. It was comprised completely of high-end Western-made furniture and even had an original Vincent van Gogh hanging casually on the wall. The painting itself was probably worth more than the entire neighborhood combined. This was the governor of the fallen angel, Azazel's home. So you aren't going to stop Kokabiel? Asked a young and handsome man with dark silver hair. His piercing blue eyes stared at his mentor as he twirled a wine glass casually in his hand. Azazel was dressed in a casual gray kimono and shook his head. No, the situation is in very good hands. The governor took a sip from his wine and sighed in relaxation. You would want to see this battle, Vali, this man is no joke at all. The young man called Vali smirked and rested his arms on the bar. For you to speak so highly of someone, this Kiroi Senko must really be all that they say he is. The silver-haired young man smirked and looked excited. I can't wait to fight him for myself. Azazel sighed and shook his head. I knew you would say that. Who wouldn't want to fight with someone with his reputation? Vali finished his glass of wine before he poured more into his glass. Perhaps he would be of great challenge. Do not underestimate this man, Vali. Even though you are the most powerful hacker Yuku to ever exist, you have to be careful when dealing with someone of his reputation. Azazel looked unusually serious. For someone so young to have gained such a reputation definitely means something, and for the church to name him their strongest exorcist, that is the one thing I am very concerned about. Vali reflected his mentor's seriousness as he silently listened. Michael is a very careful man and he won't put his subordinated in danger by giving them such titles. For this Naruto to have such a title means that he really is very powerful. But what do you think his real strength is? Asked Volley curiously. It can't just be his speed, there has to be more than just the Kiroi Senko. Azazel nodded. Yes, I am certain that he has some sort of powerful sacred gear, maybe even one of the 13 Longinus, but I have no evidence to confirm any of that. The governor sighed as he twirled his glass. But make no mistake, the spell he uses as the Kiroi Senko is not speed, it's instantaneous teleportation. Volley looked intrigued. Really? I saw him with my own eyes back in Spain several years ago, and it was not speed. Speed, no matter how fast, takes different amounts of time to clear 1 foot and 1 mile, but this man, no matter how far at distance he was going, used the same amount of time. Azazel looked directly into Volley's eyes. Your speed in your balance breaker is extremely fast, but it is still speed and not instantaneous. This man completely destroyed 300 high-class yokai in 3 minutes, and in the end there was not 1 drop of blood on him. Volley looked even more excited than before. So if you are to fight him, never let your guard down, or it would have been too late already. And you think you will learn more about his strength through Kokabiel? Asked Volley as he twirled the wine in his glass. If he really is as strong as you say, then Kokabiel wouldn't last a minute against him. I'm sure Naruto-san can easily defeat Kokabiel, I just want to see how easy. So you are just going to let Kokabiel walk into a trap? Asked Volley a little amused. You're not going to warn him at all? Azazel sighed and scratched his head. I should, but he went against my highest order and is attempting to start a war with the devils, he should be punished for his deeds. Volley nodded in agreement. So I get to have someone else take care of my stupid subordinate, and I might get to see Naruto-san's sacred gear. In the end this is a win-win situation. Volley smirked and shook his head. Sometimes I underestimate you, Azazel. I don't think so, I really am just a simple man knee-deep in research. Some knocking sounded through the small apartment of Namikaze Naruto, and he came running to the door. Opening the door he found his 2 young subordinates standing upright before they bowed to him. Zenovia Irina, reporting to Naruto-senpai. Please be at ease. Standing back up, Irina and Zenovia saw that their senpai was wearing a simple t-shirt with a pair of sweatpants under a red apron. Instead of a holy sword, there was a spatula in his hand and he appeared to be chewing on a piece of gum. Zenovia bowed again. I'm sorry senpai, we didn't know you were busy cooking. We didn't even know senpai can cook. Naruto chuckled and shook his head. Come in, I cooked something for the 2 of you as well. Oh wow, senpai is the best. Chirped Irina as she kicked off her shoes and walked into the apartment. Irina, be more polite. Cried Zenovia loudly. This is our superior. Naruto chuckled and patted Zenovia's head. Relax Zenovia, this is not Vatican City, so just come in, relax and eat. The 3 all sit down around Naruto's dinner table. There was a large plate of pasta in the middle, several baked potatoes to the side, and a large side of roast beef already sliced up. Irina had stars in her eyes as she quickly filled her plate. Zenovia was likely as happy, but was much more reserved and polite. All the while, Naruto was paging through the report his 2 subordinates had drawn up and his expression remained the same throughout. It was a little surprising that the Gremory Heiress's knight was once a member of the Excalibur program. Naruto remembered that program well because he was actually asked if he wanted to join the program, but he was otherwise engaged at the time and declined. If his memory served him right, the man who was in charge of the project was expelled from the church a few years ago for killing his subjects, but it seemed that one of those subjects survived. So the Gremory and Satiri members offered to help you destroy one of the Excaliburs. Zenovia quickly wiped her mouth and nodded. Yes, it seems that Ria's Gremory's knight, Yudo Kiba, was a survivor of the Excalibur project and wants revenge on Valper Galilei, the man that was in charge of the project. Naruto nodded at her words as his eyes kept reading the report. Haidu Issei, Kaneko Taoju, and one Genshiro Saji wants to help Yudo Kiba and came to us to offer their help. Well, this is certainly beneficial for us, but you should not have accepted their help. Zenovia looked a little nervous as Irina stopped eating. Why, senpai, with their help we would have a much higher chance of success. Naruto nodded as he placed the report down. Yes, but that is only for this one mission. Zenovia and Irina sat up taller as they listened. This was originally a quarrel between us and the fallen angels. Whether the reason for Kokabiel to target this down is because of the devils or not, we shouldn't have dragged them into this. Naruto took a sip of water and gulped it down with a sigh. If something big really comes out of this, it would not only be a war between us and Azazel, but we will also drag in at least 2 of the 4 Satans. Zenovia's eyes widened in understanding and quickly bowed. I am very sorry Naruto-senpai, we should have consulted with you before we accepted their help. Yes, sorry Naruto-senpai, muttered Irina softly. Naruto smiled and patted Zenovia's head again. Don't worry too much on this. All this means is that now we have to make sure Kokabiel's plan does not work. It is no longer only us within the mix anymore. Two heiresses of two major families of the underworld is at stake, so this has officially become a top priority mission. Hi. But this being said, I will also tag along tomorrow with you too, Zenobia, and Irina looked shocked at his words. I will still be in the shadows, but I will be following behind you in case anything dire happens. We look forward to officially working with you, senpai. Zenobia said as Irina nodded along. Naruto smiled and nodded back. Kokabiel, I think it is time that I teach you a lesson. The slight twitch of a finger sent strong vibrations along a thick tree branch, but it went unnoticed to the several people below the towering tree. A pair of piercing blue eyes glared down at the sight of Shido Irina groaning on the ground in pain as a lone figure stood tall above her. The man had a crazed expression on his face as he pulled Irina's Excalibur mimic from her arm. A manic chuckle passed through his lips as he wrapped the holy sword around his own arm. Standing about 20 feet above the man, Naruto crossed his arms together and resisted the urge to cut the man down on where he stood, but he needed to wait for the right moment. Apparently, his cute little subordinate was being used as bait for the devils in the town, and when all the devils and church affiliates had gathered, they would land a decisive strike. Knowing that she had to make sure her senpai's location and presence remained a secret, Irina remained on the ground in silence, and Zenobia ran off ahead with Kibuyudo, also knowing that she would have to come back and regroup very soon. Freed cells, and Naruto muttered inwardly as he shook his head. Naruto remembered the silver-haired man from a few years back when he was asked to evaluate some new generation exorcists for the church. Freed was one of the top students of the church and adapted very well in using holy swords, but he was soon expelled for being too bloodthirsty during missions. Naruto had never heard from his since, but he seemed that he had sided with the fallen angels and was one of the people who stole the Excalibur blades. It was sad to think that this type of exorcist turned heretic was not very uncommon. With the church's increasing ambition to gain more manpower against the other two factions, many resources were squandered on mentally unstable individuals who would not be able to handle any sort of sudden power. Their minds were already inclined to violence and battle and would not be fit as an exorcist for the church. Naruto himself almost had the same problem almost a decade ago, but that issue had long since disappeared. The blonde was broken out of his thoughts as a red magic circle appeared a little ways away from Irina, and with that Freed instantly hid behind some trees. Several figures emerged from the red light and they all rushed ahead when they saw Irina. The girl Naruto remembered as Asia immediately tried to use some sort of healing power to help Irina, and by the looks of it, it was working. Then, as much as Naruto wanted to avoid it in order to focus on his mission, his eyes landed on his childhood friend's form. Akeno was still dressed in her school uniform, which made her look stunning in Naruto's opinion, and she stood next to her comrades as they tried to understand the situation better. Naruto's eyes were locked onto Akeno as she offered her own suggestions on the situation and wondered what would happen in the near future. The Kiroi Senko had heard of the Ikatsuchi no Maiko before, but he didn't know that it was his childhood friend. As the queen of the Gremory heiress, Akeno seemed to have made a name for herself with her stronger magical power and distinct use of thunder. She was not someone that the church would target anytime soon, and that made Naruto feel better. The last thing he wanted was to be forced to choose between his duties and his dear friend. Another magic circle appeared next to the Gremory group, but this time it was the Satiri symbol. Sona Satiri walked out of the circle with two of her servants, and if the reports Irina and Zenobia wrote was correct, their names would be Genshiro Saji and Shinra Tsubaki. Naruto watched on as Irina finally woke up despite her injuries, but she was still too weak to carry on any further. The blonde wanted to take his subordinate back to his home to heal, but thankfully, the Satiri had some sort of healing chamber at their home and was willing to heal Irina. These devils are much more accommodating than most others I've met before. Well, hello, you filthy devil shits, cried the obnoxious voice of Freed as he walked out from the tree line. Rias and Sona immediately jumped to the front and targeted their magic straight at the exorcist. Wow, wait, before you do anything, my boss needs to have a little chat with the red-haired dame. The Gremory narrowed her eyes as she placed her hand down. What do you mean, chat? Suddenly, the orange glow of sunset shifted into twilight. A huge rush of power emerged out of nowhere and made everyone present look above them. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the expected sight, but all the devils below were looking at the 10-winged figure in shock. Kokabiel, one of the leaders of the fallen angels, was staring down at the group with an arrogant smirk. We've never met before, daughter of the Gremory, daughter of the Satiri, but I am Kokabiel. Naruto crossed his arms across his chest as he stared at the scene with interest. He was wondering if Kokabiel would be able to sense him, but it seemed that the fallen angel didn't possess the intuition of his governor. Naruto's blue eyes scanned the reactions and expressions of each devil as they conversed with Kokabiel, and he was mildly impressed by the demeanor of Rias Gremory and Sona Satiri. They were talking to a being that could kill them quite easily, but still appeared to be confident and relaxed. But soon Naruto's eyes landed on Akeno. Why does she look so angry? The normally compassed queen was glaring up at the fallen angel. There was a small twitch with her fingers, as if she wanted to attack and kill Kokabiel where he stood. While the devils were enemies of fallen angels, it was glaringly obvious that there was something besides religious animosity that fueled her anger. Naruto shook his head and focused on the situation. Doing such things will only trigger another war between the three factions. Exclaimed Rias firmly as she stepped forward. Kokabiel chuckled softly. Yes, isn't it great? So it has been your purpose all along, Sona said with a rather emotionless voice. You want to start a war. Sister of Surzich's Lucifer and sister of Seraphol Leviathan, let's begin a new war. With that, Kokabiel launched a barrel of light spears at the devils below him. Rias, Akeno, and Sona immediately conjured several magic barriers and blocked most of the attacks. Several of the spears leaked to the side and exploded upon impact. And when the chaos finally died down, Kokabiel, along with Freed, had vanished from sight. Naruto watched as the group of devils rushed back towards their own headquarters and remained silent the entire time. So? Said a sudden voice right next to Naruto. Are you just a spectator today or what? The blonde sighed and stood up on the branch he was sitting on. Not sure yet, but from the looks of it, the implications of your subordinate's actions can be catastrophic. The exorcist looked over at Azazel, who was wearing a dark purple silk shirt and black slacks. You are going to stop him yourself. And miss out on the chance to see you use your true power. Replied the governor with a chuckle, no way. Naruto leaned back against the tree in silence. The fact that you are here tells me that Michael intends to treat this as high priority, so as long as you follow your orders and deal with Kokabiel, I have nothing to worry about. I will kill him, Azazel said Naruto very seriously. This is the last chance I am giving you to take him back to the underworld. If he goes any further than this, then I will cut him down. Azazel turned to face the town and sighed. I also have a personal limit on things, Naruto-san. The moment Kokabiel violated my direct order of leaving the other factions alone, he was no longer a member of my faction, so kill him as you please. Naruto sighed as he stood tall. I'm going over there now, are you coming? Follow me, I have a good spectating area set up already. The purple dome of magical power surrounded Kuo Academy within seconds as the Satiri group pooled their power together into a protective barrier. It appeared that Sona Satiri wanted to keep the battle within school grounds in order to avoid involving humans, but it was optimistic sentiment at best, since a barrier like that wouldn't have enough power to prevent Kokabiel from destroying it. Naruto stared at his school of 3 days with interest as he stood precariously on a steel beam. Azazel's praised spectating area was actually the construction site of an unfinished skyscraper. He had a few chairs set out on a large beam of steel and left a vintage bottle of wine breathing for the past 20 minutes. You are enjoying this way too much, muttered Naruto without looking back at the man who was sipping on his wine. Azazel chuckled and twirled the wine in his glass. Well, this really is like a show for me and should be for you as well. The fallen angel crossed his legs and leaned back fully on his chair. You get to see just how powerful your subordinates are after all. They are 2 holy sword users of the church. I heard that it took quite a bit of effort to recreate capable users. Creating new ones are easier than to find natural ones. This just saves time. Naruto said casually as he sat down. What really matters is the user. It really doesn't matter if they can hold the blade if they can't use it to its full potential. Have you ever used a holy sword? Naruto smirked as he poured himself a drink. Well, I've used several Excaliburs before, but they really aren't my style. Azazel smirked before he downed his wine in one gulp, so the man said as he placed his glass down. Well, we watch, how about you tell me something I am very curious about? It depends on what it is. How old are you? Naruto was genuinely surprised and chuckled a little. I am 18 years old in October. Azazel started to laugh and shake his head. How in the world do you do it? The man continued to chuckle as he poured himself another drink. You aren't even 20 years old and you have become one of the most influential people in Vatican City. How did you become so powerful with so little time? The blonde smirked and shrugged. I really can't say. I have met some of the most talented and hardworking people in world, but even they lack the certain degree of power you have. Azazel appeared to be genuinely surprised at all this. Based on my assumption, you have a sacred gear that is one of the 13 Longinus, but even so, mastering such a powerful weapon takes not only time, but gargantuan amounts of effort. Now I don't know if you really have mastered your powers yet, but either way, for you to have gained such a position in the church really tells me that you have done something incredible, or else Michael wouldn't put so much faith in you. What are you really trying to say here? Naruto asked as he looked over at the man through the corner of his eyes. I find you extremely interesting, Naruto-san, and I really want to know how you managed to get so powerful so quickly. I already told you, I really can't say, but for your peace of mind, let's just say that even God's system has certain glitches, and I am one of them. The 2 powerful beings once again stared down at the ongoing fight between Kokabiel and the devils and noticed that things were becoming increasingly dire. Valper had managed to find a way to combine several pieces of Excalibur into one sword, and he was planning to channel its power into an earth-breaking spell, something that may very well destroy the entire town, along with everyone in it. But even more surprising, Yudo Kiba appeared to have awakened his balance breaker in the form of an abnormal holy demonic sword, and Zenobia unleashed her most powerful weapon, Durandal. Naruto had heard about the strong holy sword being researched, but even he didn't know that they had found a wielder for it already. You know, I expected Ria's Gremory and the Securite to be stronger. I am kind of disappointed at their power. Azazel said as he rested fully on his chair. Even with the Welsh dragon's gift ability, they still can't manage to hurt Kokabiel. I am actually very impressed with the others in her group as well as my subordinate. Naruto said with a small smile on his face. The holy demonic sword is something very unique, and for Zenobia to be able to use such a powerful sword at such a young age is really quite something. The blonde finished his drink and stood up. But either way, I think it is time for me to step in. Azazel narrowed his eyes as he looked up at Naruto. Why, its situation doesn't appear to be too dangerous, and Yudo Kiba's balance breaker shouldn't be too big of a clue to them. See you later, Azazel-san. The governor watched as the exorcist disappeared with a yellow flash and chuckled as he sipped on his wine. So he does know, Azazel mumbled with another chuckle. Incredible. Yudo Kiba and Zenobia were working together, a sight that was almost unbelievable, to defeat Fried, the man who was wielding the combined Excaliburs. When compared to the holy demonic sword, which Kiba called Sword of Betrayal, and the Durandal, the four parts of Excalibur really didn't seem all that impressive. Kiba and Fried were clashing blades at incredible speeds, and the latter was clearly at a disadvantage. The renewed Knight of the Gremory fueled himself with an unprecedented amount of fighting spirit and determination, and his movements were getting increasingly fluid and powerful as time went by. Fried, despite holding a holy sword against a devil, was being pushed back further and further until finally his sword was cut in half. It broke, cried the crazed man in shock. Kiba smiled and slashed through Fried's shoulder for good measure. My power has surpassed that of Excalibur, said the knight as Fried fell to the ground groaning in pain. Zenobia stood next to Kiba with a smile. Nice technique, Yudo Kiba, that was most impressive. Thank you, Zenobia-san. This should be impossible, stuttered out Valper as he backed away from the scene in fear. Opposing forces shouldn't be able to work in sync like that, something is terribly wrong. The man was trembling on his feet as he backed away from Kiba and Zenobia. Fried was down, and he had nobody to protect him. I am going to end you, Valper muttered Kiba with a strong glare. Valper suddenly had an enlightened expression on his face as he fell to the ground with a crazed smile. His fingers were twitching uncontrollably as a demented laugh escaped his lips. I understand now, it must be because the Satans and God per. Before the man could finish his sentence, an invisible blade of wind sliced through his shoulder, which made him cry out in pain. The man's eyes widened in shock as he saw his right arm being severed from his body and fell to the ground. Blood spewed out his stump of an arm as he let out a cry of anguish. You really are a smart man, Valper, but I can't let you say any more, said a voice from far away, all the way back to the main school building. Kiba instantly turned back to face the new voice. Who's there? Rias, Akeno, Issei, Asia, and Kaneko all turned back to see who was the one that attacked Valper, but all they saw was a shadow that was still covered by the darkness. The silhouette became increasingly apparent as it walked up to the scene. Senpai, cried out Zenobia as she turned and bowed. I'm sorry I couldn't finish the mission myself, I didn't wish for you to be bothered. Rias and her peerage were all shocked to hear that the two holy sword users actually had a superior, they had never even suspected it. So Michael did send more than just two holy sword users, muttered Kokabiel with a smirk on his face as he hovered in midair. Soon, the dim street lights and moonlight revealed a pair of dark silver slacks as a man walked into sight. The heel of his fine tailor-made shoes sent steady beats of steps as more and more of the man was revealed. A dark silver sports jacket was shown to be worn over a black silk shirt, and an elegantly placed cross was hanging around the man's neck. Everyone's eyes were locked onto the figure as he stepped into the light. Rias and Issei were the ones who noticed the blonde hair first and were in shock. What are you doing here? The Securite asked as his eyes widened in shock. Kiba, Asia and Kaneko immediately recognized the man's face and were also extremely shocked. Why, you're Zenobia-san senpai. Naruto-kun Akeno was visibly shaking as she slowly backed away from the scene. Why are you here? The face of Namikaze Naruto was revealed to everyone. His piercing blue eyes scanned his surroundings as he maintained a slow but steady stroll into the scene. His hands were slipped into his jacket pockets and appeared to have no weapons on him. The blonde looked at everyone who was staring at him and he saw all the surprise they had in their eyes, but one person in particular made Naruto stop and stare. Akeno carried a blank expression as she stared at her childhood friend who just walked into the scene. For a few seconds, her mind refused to comprehend the very obvious sight, but soon the truth started to dawn on her. Naruto was the superior of the two holy sword users, he was an affiliate of the church, and above all, he was her enemy. Naruto felt extremely guilty as he looked into Akeno's blank eyes, but reminded himself that he had a mission to finish. Zenobia ran over to her senpai and stood beside him. "Senpai, the Excalibur swords have been destroyed, but the earth-breaking spell is still active, and fallen angel Kokabiel intends to see it to the end. I know, I have been monitoring the situation." "So young," said the voice of Kokabiel, which sliced through the silence like a hot knife through butter. "Do I really seem so weak in Michael's eyes that he only sends children to fight me?" A soft laugh escaped his lips as he shook his head. "No matter, this town is going to vanish in a few minutes, and all of you will be dead. I'm sure that will teach Michael not to underestimate me next time." Kokabiel placed his hands on his hips as he chuckled, looking down at everyone with glaring condescension. "No," Valper muttered weakly as he knelt in a pool of his own blood. "He is no child." Naruto stared up at Kokabiel as everyone else looked over at Valper. "By the order of Michael-sama, I will eliminate you." Kokabiel spoke Naruto with a casual and relaxed voice. "Eliminate me?" Kokabiel asked with a chuckle, "As if a lowly exorcist can defeat me." "Hey Kokabiel-sama!" cried out Valper as loudly as he could. "He is not just any child, he is the Vatican's most powerful exorcist." Everyone's eyes widened again at the announcement. "And Namek is Naruto, he is extremely dangerous. The most powerful exorcist," exclaimed Rias as Issei and Kaneko stood in front of her protectively. "Impossible, he is the Kiroi Senko." Akeno's breathing increased in speed as she stepped back more from the scene. Kokabiel looked more serious as Valper forced himself to his feet. "I never thought Michael-sama would send someone like him to stop us." The old man looked extremely scared as he edged himself closer to Kokabiel. "He is the Kiroi Senko and is the Vatican's most powerful soldier." Valper was visibly shaking as his arm continued to bleed. We should retreat while we have the chance, he will kill us both." Rias was growing increasingly worried along with the rest of her peerage. For Valper to want to escape when Kokabiel was clearing having a very large advantage suggested the power of the Kiroi Senko. Rias had heard of the infamous exorcist before. Her brother and sister-in-law had discussed the very same person at length that last time she was in the underworld. Even Mao Lucifer and the strongest queen few a little worried of the church having someone so powerful under their command. It was not every day that someone could destroy armies alone and come out without a scratch. Zenobia was also very shocked. She knew about her senpai's reputation inside and out of the Vatican, but after seeing the strength of Kokabiel, she was shocked that Valper would suggest their retreat. Was Naruto's strength really so terrifying that even a 10-winged fallen angel would have to flee from him? "I think you are overestimating this boy's power," Valper said Kokabiel with a smirk on his face. But for someone so young to have such an infamous reputation, Valper grew increasingly concerned as Kokabiel trailed off. Valper spoke Naruto softly as he looked over at the old man, who immediately flinched. "So even after the church expelled you, you still continue to research on creating artificial holy sword users. How many lives have you taken? How many children have you sacrificed?" The blonde looked angry as he glared over at the old man. "So," started Kokabiel again as Naruto turned his attention back to the fallen angel. "You are the infamous Kiroi Senko. It's hard to believe that you are just a kid." "Kokabiel, it's hard to believe that one of the leaders of the fallen angels would do something so petty." Naruto maintained eye contact as he walked up to the fallen angel. "If you really want to start a war, then attack the Mao in the underworld, not lurk around their younger siblings like a pathetic rat." Kokabiel visibly looked angry and growled a little at Naruto as Issei stepped back. Hey, do you really have to make him more angry?" Hiba decided to speak up. "Naruto-senpai, are you on our side?" Naruto smiled and nodded without looking over at the knight. "Yes, my business here is only to deal with Kokabiel and the Excaliburs, so please relax, Kiba-san." Rias stepped forward and walked closer to Naruto. "In that case then we will work together. We have to defeat Kokabiel before that Earthbreaker spell obliterates this town." Ahahaha. Kokabiel laughed at the sight below him. "Devils and exorcists working together to kill me, this already feels nostalgic." The man lifted his arms above his head as light gathered above him. "To hell with the Earthbreaker spell, I will destroy all of you right here and now." A light spear formed between Kokabiel's hands and it quickly grew in size. It glowed brighter and brighter as it continued to grow and soon it was the size of a small building. "I am going to destroy this town and mark the beginning of the Second Great War." The light spear reached the ceiling of the barrier and it was strong enough to effortlessly destroy it. The purple barrier came tumbling down to the ground like a shattered piece of glass. A light spear of that size will destroy this town several times over," cried Kiba as he stood protectively in front of his king. "Shit, what the hell do we do?" cried Issei as he held his boosted gear in front of his body. Zenobia stood in front of Naruto with Durandal in place. "Senpai, there is no way we can deflect such an attack, even with Durandal, I can't deter such power." The girl had a troubled and worried look on her face as she looked at Naruto through the corner of her eyes. "What do we do?" Naruto remained silent and just looked up at Kokabiel with his hands still in his pockets. "Rias?" cried the familiar voice of Sona Satiri as she ran into the area with her peerage. "We've come to help." Seeing that the barrier was destroyed by Kokabiel, the Satiri came running into the school, but most of their members were already tired from holding the barrier for so long. "I'm glad, but we really are in a tight spot right now." Rias looked over at the large clock on the old schoolhouse. "Ani-sama's help will come in another 40 minutes, but it seems that we won't make it till then." "Haidu?" cried Saji as he ran over to his friend. "Can't your boosted gear do anything about it?" "No," muttered Issei as he gritted his teeth, "this is way out of my league." Akeno was still standing away from the main group by herself, but she was also looking up at the large spear of light. "Naruto-kun." "Akeno?" cried Rias as she looked back at her queen. "Come over here." The black-haired girl shook herself out of her stupor and ran over to her king with great difficulty. "Issei, quickly boost up as many time as you can, transfer as much power as you can to us, and we will make the strongest barrier we can." "Hi, but you." "It won't work," said Naruto as he looked over at Rias and her peerage, his eyes lingering on Akeno longer than he would have liked. "With the power you have now, there is no way you can power up enough to block an attack like that." Rias gritted her teeth and glared at Naruto. "Then what do you suggest we do, just wait and die?" Naruto turned back and looked up at Kokabiel. "No, just stand there and let me take care of it." Ignoring the looks everyone else was giving him, Naruto broke away from the group and walked closer to Kokabiel, whose spear was still growing in size. "But this attack, I will have killed Lucifer's sister, Leviathan's sister, the Sakariate, and the Kiroi Senko." Kokabiel was laughing as he held his spear. "With this both Michael and Surziches will come for the Grigori." Everyone tensed up as he pulled his spear back and proceeded to launch it downwards. Die. The gargantuan spear of light was extremely bright and it was becoming larger and larger as it came crashing down to the ground. Everyone looked up at the attack in shock and felt helpless in their plight, but before the attack could reach them, it stopped. Looking closer, a very light black magic circle blocked its path. But for some reason, the attack did not explode upon impact, and when everyone looked closer, the spear was being sucked into the magic circle. Soon, more than half of the spear was consumed by the black magic circle. "What is going on?" cried Kokabiel angrily. "I told you we should leave, Kokabiel-sama," cried Valper in fear. Looking right underneath the black magic circle, everyone saw Naruto holding onto a tri-pronged kunai. His blue eyes were looking up at the magic circle as it consumed the light spear, and as the spear had entire passed into the circle, he flicked the kunai and slashed it downwards. The magic circle vanished as if it had never existed before, and all was silent as the night once again became dark. But after a few seconds, a light could be seen high up above the clouds. Soon after, a very loud explosion sounded throughout the town as the clouds above were blown far away from the blast epicenter. A very bright light followed the explosion and everyone was staring at it in shock. "He teleported the spear away," said Rias as she looked over at Naruto. "To think he could also teleport enemy attacks away," muttered Zenobia as she stared at her senpai in awe. "No wonder he is called the strongest exorcist." "Amazing!" exclaimed Issei as Asia hugged his arm tightly. "The Kiroi Senko really is nothing to joke about," Sona said as she stood next to Akeno, who was staring at Naruto's back silently. As the attack faded away, Naruto continued to walk forward until he reached the large magic circle where the Earthbreaker spell was brewing. "Did you really think you can kill all of us so easily?" asked the blonde without looking up at the fallen angel, missing the angry expression on his face. "I was sent here to punish you for your sins, and I do intend to finish this mission." The blue aura started to gather around Naruto as his power surged. The ground around him started to shake from the power he was emitting in waves. He focused his energy into one leg as he stood in front of the yellow magic circle, and with his hands still in his pockets, he stomped his leg down to the ground. The violent shake was sent throughout the area as a blast of blue energy distorted the magic circle on the ground and caused it to collapse. "You bastard!" Kokabiel grounded out as he landed on the ground a little ways away from Naruto. Kiba gritted his teeth as he held his sword of betrayal in front of him. He shattered the Earthbreaker spell just by sending his own magical power through it. "Just how strong is this guy?" asked Issei as he stood next to Rias. The Grimoire heiress was suddenly reminded that the man in front of them was in fact the childhood friend of Akeno, and she quickly looked at her queen, who was standing right beside her. Rias immediately noticed the blank expression on Akeno's face, which was something she could understand. It must have been hard for Akeno to find out so suddenly that one of her most important friends was in fact an exorcist. "I see, so you really aren't just a boy," said Kokabiel with a smirk on his face. "Instead of working for Michael, how about you switch over to our side?" Zenobia glared at Kokabiel for his suggestion. "We will provide you with endless resources. We can give you all the power, money and women you can possibly want." Kokabiel chuckled as placed his hands on his hip. "Why work for the church when your leader is already dead?" Naruto's glared hard at Kokabiel as he flared his aura. "You really do want a war? What are you saying?" cried Zenobia as she stepped forward. "What do you mean our leader is dead?" Kokabiel grinned as he traced his chin with his fingers. "Oh, I wasn't supposed to tell, but since I'm starting a war, why the hell would I care?" The fallen angel let out a boisterous laugh as Naruto gripped his fists. "In the Great War, all 4 Satans along with God died." Shock coursed through everyone's mind as the incredible news registered in their heads. "God died?" mumbled Zenobia as she shook. "You lie, that is not possible," cried Rias as she glared at Kokabiel. Alper, who was still kneeling on the ground, smiled. "So I was right, it is the only reason why holy demonic swords can exist. There is no way God has died, I can still feel his love," cried Asia in tears as she led it against his save for support. Kokabiel laughed at the reactions of the people around him. "I'm not lying, Michael has been the one operating heaven and the angels since the Great War. If you don't believe me, ask Kiroi Senko-sen over there." Zenobia staggered a little as she looked at Naruto. "Senpai, is he telling the truth?" Naruto sighed as he turned back and ruffled Zenobia's hair. "I'm sorry, I should have not let him finish that sentence." Tears started to well up in Asia's eyes and Zenobia fell to her knees. "This is something that normal devils, angels and humans should never know. I'm sorry that you had to find out this way." "Asia," cried Issei as the blonde girl fell to the ground unconscious. "Haha, I've been looking forward to seeing how people will react to the news, it was oddly amusing," exclaimed Kokabiel as he laughed. "Just wait until I leak this news to Vatican City, I can't wait to see how you people will deal with that." Zenobia shut her eyes as she dropped Durandal to the ground. "Oh, I can't wait for this war to start." Before he could finish his words, the air in his lungs was forced out as a powerful fist lodged itself against his stomach. Kokabiel stared into Naruto's eyes as he felt pain course through his body. The force behind that one punch was incredible. The blonde then kneed the fallen angel hard in the face and felt oddly satisfied when he felt his nose shatter on impact. Kokabiel's body was sent backwards as his head was launched back, and when Naruto saw this, he followed up with a hard kick to his midsection, sending Kokabiel flying backwards until he crashed into a large tree, causing it to topple over. "That's so fast," exclaimed Kiba. Kokabiel growled as he forced himself to his feet. "Why, you brat." He created several light spears around him and sent them all at Naruto, but he was shocked to see that he was already in front of him. Another hard punch landed on his right cheek and several of his teeth were knocked out. His eyes widened again when Naruto, who was right in front of him, disappeared with a yellow flash, and before he could even see where he went, a strong kick landed on his back. Blood spewed from Kokabiel's mouth as he was sent crashing into the ground with a stomp. "You are marked, so there is no way for you to escape now. This must be the Kiroi Senko's teleportation spell," thought Sona Satiri as she stared at the scene in awe. Kokabiel struggled against the foot that was stepping on his back and suddenly summoned all of his wings. The raven-colored feathers were all as sharp as blades, and all 10 of his wings slashed at Naruto at once, but once again, the blonde had vanished. Before Kokabiel could raise his head to look around, another foot stomped on his head, burying his face into the dirt. "You no longer need these wings." A sheathed katana appeared in Naruto's hands as he stood above Kokabiel. Almost too quick for the naked eye, Naruto unsheathed his katana and clipped Kokabiel's wings in half. The fallen angel cried out in pain as Naruto continued to cut his wings down, and soon all his wings were on the ground. I don't believe it," muttered Issei as he watched Kokabiel squirm helplessly on the ground. He can't even fight back." "Naruto-senpai's strikes are very strong," said Kaneko as she looked at the cracks along the ground where Kokabiel's face was. Hiba was shaking as he watched the fight, but his eyes remained locked on Naruto's katana. "That blade, it is a holy sword." Naruto kept his foot lodged onto Kokabiel's head as he held his katana in his hand and felt the power that the blade gave off. The Kusanagi no Tsurugi, a legendary sword of Japan he obtained from the stomach of an 8-headed serpent he slayed a few years ago, was one of the most powerful holy swords in the world. It may not have been crafted by the god from the Bible, but it was still extremely powerful, and most importantly, it suited his style. "This farce has gone on for far too long," said Naruto as he held his blade down to Kokabiel's neck. "It is time to end it. Goodbye, Kokabiel." Kokabiel flared his power as much as he could, but Naruto's foot still didn't budge, and his cries sounded out loudly throughout the area until the Kusanagi sliced through his neck. The fallen angel's body started to dissolve into small particles of light and soon faded from existence. Looking back at the crowd, Naruto saw that almost everyone was looking at him with shock and awe. Even the 2 sisters of 2 of the current Satans were stunned silent after seeing his display of power, which was understandable since he made Kokabiel look like a low-class devil that was just born. But once again, Naruto's eyes found its way to the purple orbs of Akeno, who was still looking at him with an uncomfortable expression on her face. "I have a lot of explaining to do." Japan and Vatican City had a time difference of 8 hours, and even though it was very late at night, Archbishop Henry was more than happy to receive a call from the Kiroi Senko. It was reported that the 3 missing pieces of Excalibur were destroyed during a quarrel with Kokabiel, and the fallen angel himself had perished in battle. The good news was very welcomed in the archbishop's ears. The thought of the fallen angels taking possession of some of the most powerful holy swords was almost unbearable for most in the clergy, but unfortunately there was one setback. But even someone like the archbishop had not the privilege to know of such things. Instead of a cell phone, Naruto utilized a magic circle and connected himself directly to heaven, where he would usually report to his real superior. Unlike his Horatian magic circle, the communication spell was wide in color and was very small, so small that Naruto could easily channel to his palm and hold it like a cell phone. "Hello, Michael-sama." The familiar and comforting voice of the archangel immediately greeted Naruto. "Hello Naruto-kun, I am very glad to hear from you again." Ever since Naruto became one of the Church in Heaven's most powerful warriors, he had been reporting directly to Archangel Michael, making Naruto one of the most powerful and free man in Vatican City. "Ooh, is that Naruto-chan?" exclaimed a girly and kind voice from behind Michael's voice. "Hello Naruto-chan, I miss you." Naruto couldn't help but smile at the serene voice of his surrogate older sister. "Hello, Gabriel-sama, it is great to hear from you as well." "Ooh, why are you so formal? I told you to call me Gabriel-nichan. But we are talking official business right now, Gabriel-sama." Naruto replied, knowing the pout Gabriel would definitely have on her face at that moment. "Sorry Naruto-kun, but please continue your report." Michael instructed despite his sister's presence. Naruto cleared his throat and nodded despite they couldn't see him. "Again, all 3 Excaliburs had been destroyed and I killed Kokabiel myself, but unfortunately there I made a careless mistake." Hearing Naruto's tone, Michael and Gabriel both became more serious. Kokabiel's motives were to start another great war between the 3 factions, and as an attempt to persuade me to join him, he announced the death of the Lord to everyone present. The other side was silent for a few seconds as Naruto finished. "That is indeed unfortunate," said Michael with a slight sigh. "How many of our people were present?" "Excluding myself, only Zenobia-san was present and she was very shocked to say the least." Both Michael and Gabriel remained silent as they heard the news, which made Naruto close his eyes. "I am well aware of how we usually handle these situations, but I would like to propose that Zenobia be allowed to stay in the church under my direct command." Michael and Gabriel were surprised at the suggestion but considered it. "Are you sure that is wise, Naruto-kun?" "I am confident that I can keep her in control and I can vouch for her personality. She is not someone who would leak information such as this," Naruto said as he walked around his living room. "Like me, she was also raised by Griselda-san and I believe she will also vouch for Zenobia." Michael sighed before he nodded. "Well, if you are sure she can handle it, then I will allow it." Naruto smiled and nodded to himself. "Thank you Michael-sama. Thank you again for your good work Naruto-kun, I know we can always count on you." Michael smiled as he spoke through the spell. "I'm afraid that lately we have become a burden for you to carry, and for that I am truly sorry." Naruto was surprised at the sudden apology and quickly responded. "Please do not think anything of the sort, Michael-sama, it was you and the church that saved me 13 years ago, and Gabriel-sama had been like an older sister to me, so this is my family." Gabriel smiled brightly as she heard Naruto's words. "It is both my duty and honor to carry out such tasks for the church and for my family, so please do not speak of being a burden to me." "I'm glad, Naruto-kun." Michael smiled along with his sister. "You are truly a blessing for us. I can't wait until you join us up here, Naruto-chan," cried Gabriel happily as she grabbed onto her brother's arm. "You will be one of the 10 seraphs." Gabriel had a beautiful smile on her face as she giggled. "I have a feeling that you will have 10 wings the moment brother reincarnates you." Naruto smiled fondly of his sister and nodded. "I look forward to it too, Gabriel-nichan, but there is still a few years left before I will ascend to heaven." "Oh, why so long?" "Please sister, leave Naruto-kun be," chided Michael as Gabriel pouted a little. "Thank you again, Naruto-kun, and please stay in that town for the time being, we will come meet with you in a little while." "Hi, Michael-sama." "Goodbye, Naruto-kun. See you later, Naruto-chan." With that, the communication spell ended and the magic circle vanished from Naruto's hand. With a small smile on his face, Naruto walked over to the second bedroom of the home and knocked on the door a few times. He could some slight shuffling on the other side of the door and soon it opened to reveal a visibly distraught Zenobia. "What is it, senpai?" asked the girl with a raspy voice. Naruto smiled and led her out to the living room and sat her down on the couch. "How are you feeling?" Zenobia forced a smile and shrugged. "I don't know, I have no idea how to act anymore." The girl looked at her superior a little nervously. "But what is going to happen to me now?" "You don't have to worry, from now on you will be my personal assistant and you will follow me on my missions." Zenobia looked shocked as she heard what Naruto said. "You are a valuable asset to the church, and even though you were told of the Lord's death prematurely, we are not going to brand you as a heretic." "Really?" asked the girl as a true smile appeared on her face. But I thought in situations like this, everyone would be expelled from the church." You are different, not only are you the wielder of the Durandal, you also have me and Griselda Obachan to vouch for your personality. Zenobia smiled brighter as some tears welled up in her eyes. Thank you senpai. Naruto chuckled and patted the girl's head. Before we left, Griselda Obachan asked me to take care of you, and I intend to do so. Zenobia felt warm and cozy at Naruto's affection. We may not have been close when we were growing up, but we had the same guardian, so you are like my little sister, and I will look out for you. Zenobia smiled happily and nodded, too emotional to talk at the moment. Not to mention how scary Griselda Obachan will be once she heard that I couldn't save you from being expelled. Zenobia gave a tearful laugh as she nodded again. Yeah, Griselda-sama is really scary. Even though I am stronger than her, how, she still scares the hell out of me. Naruto chuckled a little at his own joke as Zenobia laughed. As the laughter died down, the mood became more relaxed and happy, and Naruto placed a comforting hand on Zenobia's shoulder. You can relax now. I know that the death of the Lord will still be very shocking for you, but it will pass, and you will have to learn to live in this world and work for the church while knowing our leader is gone. The girl turned more serious and nodded. I understand and I will definitely succeed. Naruto smiled and nodded. I know you will. Zenobia looked up at her senpai rather timidly before speaking. Senpai, would it be asking too much if I want to train with you? Naruto looked rather amused as Zenobia blushed a little. It was odd seeing the normally dignified holy sword user being so hesitant. I know I am nowhere near strong enough to spar with you, but can you please teach me how to master Durandal? Of course I can. Replied Naruto without a second thought as Zenobia smiled. You are my assistant now, so you will also be sent on ultimate class missions with me, and I have to make sure you are strong enough to complete those missions. The blonde summoned his own holy sword and held it in his hands. This is the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, a blade the Shinto god Susanoo found in the carcass of the Yamata no Urachi. I also found this when I was sent on a mission a few years ago to kill an 8-headed serpent. It might not be as flashy as Excalibur or Durandal, but I assure you it is just as powerful. Naruto smiled and placed the blade on his lap. After your training with me, I expect you to fight with me with Durandal for at least a minute straight and be able to parry my sword with your sword. Zenobia looked determined and nodded. I will try my very best, senpai. Good, now turn in and go to bed, you will need some rest after today. Okay then, good night senpai. As he watched the girl walk back to her bedroom, Naruto stood from his couch and walked over to the middle of his living room. He saw his cell phone that was on his coffee table and rubbed his temple as he dialed a very familiar number. The bland drone of the dial sounded into his ear, and it noticed it was really not clear compared to the heaven communication spell. Hello, this is Namikaze Naruto. Slight stammering was heard on the other side of the line. Hello again Naruto-sama, how can I help you today? Have my plane ready in 20 minutes, I have sent a car to the airport already. Naruto walked into his kitchen and grabbed a glass from his cupboard as he spoke. There will be 3 passengers, treat the lady as well as you treat me, but just put the other 2 in the storage unit. The storage unit sir, the man asked rather surprised. They are criminals, they're lucky I don't stuff them in a luggage bag. I understand sir, will they all be flying back to Vatican City? Naruto poured himself some milk and nodded to himself. Yes, and have someone take them to Archbishop Henry as soon as they land, he will know what to do. Alright sir, everything is set up and ready to go. Thank you, that's all for tonight. Naruto hung up and gently placed his phone on the kitchen counter. With a sigh, the blonde walked over to his entertainment system and connected his phone to the receiver. Some soft jazz come out of his 6-speaker system and Naruto took a gentle seat on his couch, letting the music lead his mind into a quiet and peaceful place, just for the night. After one of the longest nights of her life, Ria's Gremory was once again back in the old schoolhouse, having her usual meeting with her peerage. The events of the previous night were still fresh in everybody's mind, so the mood was still rather tense. There was none of the usual enthusiasm from her peerage members, even the ever-cheerful Issei appeared to look a little dazed. Rias really couldn't blame them for acting this way, near-death experiences would always deeply affect everyone involved. The Gremory heiress flipped through her papers as usual as everyone else enjoyed some of the snacks put on along the table, but it seemed that even the snack was not as good as usual. Instead of the freshly baked good they usually had, the table was only filled with store-bought cookies and potato chips, and that was because their snack goddess was inactive at the moment. Ever since Naruto disappeared the previous night to report with his superiors, Akeno had locked herself inside her own house and refused to come out. Rias was the only one who was allowed inside, but she came out alone after a few hours. Almost 12 hours have passed since then, but Akeno was still locked inside her room and her friends were getting worried. But you, why are we still here? Asked Issei politely as he looked over at the red-haired beauty. The meeting ended half an hour ago. Rias sighed and rested her elbows on her desk. You guys can go if you want, I just wanted to see if Akeno would come today. Asia walked up to her king's desk looking concerned. Is Akeno-senpai okay? Asked the girl timidly. What happened to her? I thought I already healed her last night. Ria smiled at the girl and waved her off. Don't worry Asia, Akeno is not hurt, at least not physically anyway. Does it have anything to do with Naruto-senpai? Asked a usual stoic voice of Kaneko as she snacked on some bad store-bought cookies. Kiba nodded at her words. Yeah, I noticed that Akeno-senpai had been getting quite close to Naruto-senpai before last night. Is she shocked because he turned out to be an exorcist? Ria smiled at her peerage and just shook her head. I'm sure that is just part of the reason, but I'm sure she'll be fine very soon. The relationship between Naruto and Akeno was unclear even to Rias, so she wouldn't try to imply anything. I will go visit her later, I'll try to make feel better. Issei sighed as he slumped down on the couch. I can see why Akeno-san would be so shocked. None of us expected Naruto-san to be an exorcist, but he turned out to be someone so amazing. The secretary ran his fingers through his hair as thought back to the previous night. I mean, all of us together couldn't even land a hit on Kokabiel, but Naruto-san killed him without even trying. Kiba nodded as he leaned his back against the wall. Naruto-senpai moved faster than anything I have seen before, even my sensei can't move at that speed. Rias looked concerned as she closed her eyes. It was like he was at several places at the same time, and it was as if he had no momentum at all. Kiba closed his eyes and pictured Naruto's fight. It should be impossible to move in one direction at that speed and just switch to the opposite direction instantly afterwards. At the same speed, a normal person's body wouldn't be able to handle such change. That was not speed, muttered Rias as everyone looked over at her. It was instantaneous teleportation. He was literally at several places at almost the same moment in time. He could teleport himself at high speed to an intended target, so in our eyes he was cutting down Kokabiel with impossible speeds. Teleportation, how can he use it so quickly? Asked Kaneko. Nobody knows, but the technique he was using was not anything like our teleportation circles, it is much more advanced. Rias entwined her fingers together and leaned in further on her desk. He can teleport instantaneously at will, and it allows him to fight in extremely high speeds. But still, muttered Issei looking a little troubled. Kokabiel was supposed to be one of the leaders of the entire Fallen Angel faction, and for him to be utterly owned like that, it's just really hard to believe. Even Valper was scared of him and instantly suggested to retreat the moment he walked in. Kiba knew the personality of his enemy very well, and for a man like him to cower in fear while having Kokabiel was his side was something he never thought possible. Then he called Naruto-senpai something, I believe it was Kiroi Senko. Rias nodded. I'm surprised none of you had heard of him before, but that is a name that had been circling around the human world, the underworld, a lot in recent years. Everyone leaned in closer to listen to Ria's story. 3 years ago in Spain, there was a huge dispute between the European yokai, the church, and the devils, and Ani-sama sent his peerage to deal with them. Grafia was leading the group because they recognized the enemy to be quite strong, but in the end they didn't even have to fight. What happened? Asked Asia timidly. The church had sent their own people to deal with the yokai, only one person. Rias leaned back on her chair and looked at her family. The yokai's number was estimated to be over 300, and Ani-sama's peerage, though that one man was just a joke on the church's side, but they were all shocked when that one man killed every single yokai inside in under 3 minutes. Kiba's eyes widened as everyone fell in shock. But that's impossible. Rias sighed and nodded. That was what Grafia thought at the time in her report. All they saw was the man vanishing in small yellow flashes, but these flashes moved at an unprecedented speed, so fast that the yokai didn't even have the chance to retreat before they were all destroyed. Ria's peerage was stunned silent at the thought of such a monster. This event gave birth to the name Kiroi Senko, and he had become a terror ever since. How did someone so powerful just randomly appear 3 years ago? Asked Asia in shock. Rias shook her head. The incident in Spain was not the first incident. There had been many other times large groups of fallen angels, yokai, and even devils were slaughtered and left for dead, but those times nobody saw who killed them. Spain was the first time ever that someone had witnessed the Kiroi Senko at work. Rias could still remember the day she and Akeno heard about the incident. Even Ani-sama said that the church will have a huge advantage over the other two factions just because of this man, and had listed finding out who he is as one of the top priorities for all devils. So have to notified Surziches-sama about Naruto-senpai, but you? Asked Kaneko looking more focused than usual. Yes, I sent him a message right after we were done last night and I am still waiting for a reply. Rias bit her bottom lip a little in thought. If the Kiroi Senko is in this town, we have to make precautions about him attacking us. We might have to escape to the underworld for the moment. Holy hell, I can't believe this guy can force us to leave just by being here. Issei leaned forward until he was sitting on the very edge of the couch. Someone who is our age, he is the same age as Akeno-san and Butchu. Yes, that was very surprising to be as well. I was expecting him to be someone at least in his 30s. The Grimoire heiress crossed her arms and sighed again. But it doesn't matter, school starts again tomorrow, and if he is still attending then we and Sona's peerage may have to take a leave of absence. You don't have to do that, said a sudden voice from the window, and everyone looked over to shock as they saw Naruto leaning against the window pane casually. I have no intention of attacking any of you while I am in town. Kiba was the first to react and jumped in front of Rias with his sword of betrayal in his hand. Kaneko and Issei soon followed, both in their battle positions, and Asia quickly ran over to Rias and prepared her twilight healing. Rias herself felt very intimidating, but forced herself to walk forward. Naruto-san, what can I do for you today? The blonde sighed and crossed his arms. I would like to start by saying that my business in this town is only with Kokabiel and his culprits. Now that my mission is over, I will not attempt or threaten anyone in this town. Rias stared at the man for a few seconds before she gestured to her peerage to relax, and they lowered their weapons. There is no need for you or the Satiri group to leave for the underworld, because I don't think I will be staying here for long anyways. Rias nodded and crossed her arms as well. I understand, but you must understand that we want to keep our distance from you. Yes, I am well aware, and I don't blame you. Naruto had a small smile on his face as he rubbed the back of his head. My actions haven't exactly been kind to my reputation, and I am more infamous than famous, but I assure you that I am not someone that only kills and destroy. The blonde leaned against the pane of the window as he spoke. My duty is to maintain balance between the three factions and make sure that no great change occurs that will affect our current peace, so as long as you don't try to assassinate anyone too important, you don't have to worry about me. That is quite ironic as your presence shifts the balance of power greatly to the church, said Rias, feeling more like her usual self. Naruto smirked and shook his head. I think you think too greatly of me. I am not powerful enough for such things, but if I must say, I believe my presence had only balanced the powers even better. Rias narrowed her eyes at the man as he spoke. Ever since the end of the Great War, the devils had gained for new and powerful Satans, some might say even more powerful than the original, and I am only one human the church has gained. Fair enough, but enough small talk, please tell me why you are here today. I am here to clear things up a little. Naruto cleared his throat and looked over at Kiba. Valper is currently on a one-way flight back to Vatican City, and I have ordered my people to lock him up in one of the deepest jails in the Vatican. He will never see the light of day again. Kiba was a little surprised, but nodded nonetheless. I also want to say that the Holy Sword Project is now under my command, and let me assure you that there is no longer any sort of human testing for sacrifices. We have figured out a way to produce sword users through pure means. Kiba nodded again before he looked down at the ground. I'm glad. I know it isn't much, but on behalf of the church I would like to apologize to you, Yudo Kiba. What Valper did was unforgivable, and it was our fault that he was allowed to operate for so long. Naruto gave Kiba a small bow before looking back at him. But I will personally make sure that nothing of the sort will happen again. Rias gave a small smile and stepped closer to Naruto. You are rather humble for a man of your power. Believe me, I am not an arrogant old fart like most of the people think I am. Remember, I am the same age as you, Rias-san, and I do want to act my age. I believe we also owe you a thank you for saving us last night. Without your help we, along with everyone in this town, would have been killed by Kokabiel. Issei nodded along with a grin. Yeah, thanks a lot. Naruto gave a small smile and shook his head. You are very welcome, but I was only doing my job. Rias and the others offered him their smiles for his words. Well, that was all I wanted to speak to you about, so have a good night. Okay, goodbye, Naruto-san. Rias replied politely. Naruto turned back and was about to leave, but he hesitated. May I please ask where Akeno-chan is at the moment? Asked the man without turning back. Rias was afraid that this question would come, but just shook her head. I'm sure you know that Akeno, out of everyone, was the most shocked last night, so I don't think telling you where she is such a good idea right now. The blonde closed his eyes and nodded. I understand. He turned around and stuck his hands into his pocket. I will still be in town for the next few days, but in case I don't see any of you again, goodbye. With that, Naruto disappeared with a flash of yellow, just like the previous night. The sun was finally beginning to set after seemingly long day, and its orange glow gave off a very warm and homely aura to everyone on town. Having nothing to do until the higher-ups gather in the school, Naruto was aimlessly wandering around the town, hoping for something interesting to happen. It had already been 3 hours since he left the old schoolhouse, and he can't seem to rid the thoughts of Akeno from his mind. He could vividly remember the expression on Akeno's face once she realized he was an exorcist. Naruto was genuinely surprised to see so many emotions run through Akeno's eyes in the split second they made eye contact. Akeno behaved much more intensely than he had expected, and it had been bothering him greatly ever since. The blonde ran his fingers through his hair before reaching down to button up his black sports jacket. It was getting a little chilly as the wind grew stronger. Looking around his surroundings, Naruto found that he was already at the edge of town. There were no longer any tall buildings around him, but there were a lot of wooden houses and a large forest that stretched into undeveloped territory. There was a lone staircase at the bottom of the forest, and it apparently led up to some sort of clearing. Seeing how he had nowhere else to go, Naruto made his way towards the stairs. I wonder what is up there. The sun was setting faster than Naruto had expected, and soon the stairs were almost too dark to see, but there was some light coming from the top of the stairs. The light was flickering as Naruto got closer, so he assumed that it was some sort of live flame and not artificial light. After a few more steps, Naruto saw a large Shinto arch, which indicated that the building ahead was in fact a shrine. Naruto smiled as he took in the elegant Japanese architect. It was much different than what he was used to make in the Vatican, but still gave off a mystical feel to the beholder. The sun had fully set, and the shrine was only lighted by a few traditional lanterns hanging on the main building, and Naruto could see something cleaning the main lobby with a broom. Akeno-chan. Standing in the middle of a small lighted area was in fact Akeno, wearing her shrine maiden clothes as she swept the floors with a bamboo broom. Her movement suddenly ceased the moment she heard a very familiar voice call out to her, but she slowly turned her head to look at the entrance of the shrine. Her violet orbs once again connected with Naruto's piercing blue eyes, and she instantly felt some fear course through her. Akeno quickly turned around and walked over to the main building of the shrine. "Wait, Akeno-chan," cried Naruto as he quickly sped over to his friend. Even without his Hiraishin, he was extremely fast, and he grabbed onto her wrist before she could take another step. Akeno avoided Naruto's gaze and tried to pull her wrist free. "Let go of me," she said weakly. Naruto felt his heart ache when he saw some dried tears on Akeno's cheeks. "Please, can I just talk to you?" Some tears started to gather in Akeno's eyes as she shivered a little, and her movement started to calm down. I really didn't mean to hide from you. I knew you were a devil from the day I saw you again at my concert, and since that moment I really couldn't tell you who I am." Akeno's tears started to flow down her cheeks, which made Naruto feel even worse. "I was on a mission and there was no way I could tell you I was an exorcist." "Then why?" whispered Akeno without looking at Naruto. "Why did you try to get close to me?" "Akeno-chan." Akeno turned to look at Naruto after a deep breath and gritted her teeth as more tears fell. "You knew that I was a devil, so you knew that nothing good would ever come out of us being close." Naruto's frown deepened as he gently held onto Akeno's wrist. "Did you know how happy I was to meet with you again after so long? Did you know that I was so obsessed with you that I couldn't even sleep? Did you know how much it would hurt me when you show me the truth?" Akeno glared at Naruto and slapped him hard across his cheek. I'm sorry, Akeno-chan," muttered Naruto as he felt his own heart sting at the sight in front of him. "I really didn't know you thought so deeply of me." Akeno channeled some lightning to her hand and pulled her wrist out by force. "Don't apologize," cried the girl as she stepped back a little. "Tell me why you got close to me even though you knew we are destined enemies." "Because you are important to me," answered Naruto quickly. "You wouldn't be able to imagine just how important our brief meeting was to me, how much it affected me." Akeno calmed down slightly as she continued to listen. "My parents died 1 month after I met you." The deep emotion was clear in Naruto's voice as he spoke. "I was left an orphan and was taken to the church because of my powers. I had no friends at all. You were the only one I could even consider a friend." Akeno was getting increasingly surprised as each second passed. "He was like me. I lost everything I had in a few days, and when I moved to the church all I had was some photos and this watch." Naruto pushed his sleeve back and showed Akeno that he was still wearing her watch. "My powers had just awoke at the time, and it was going crazy. Watching the steady tempo of this watch was the only thing that kept me from destroying everything around me." Naruto smiled as he looked down at the watch. "In a way, the ticking of this watch was my first song, and it was its tempo that allowed me to train with my powers." Akeno looked down at the watch and stared at the smiley face. "I thought about you all the time back then, and I promised myself that when I was strong enough, I would come back to Japan to find you and thank you again for this watch." "Did you ever come back to Japan?" "I was alone too, you know," choked out Akeno as she dried some of her tears. Naruto looked down at the ground and shook his head. "No, I never got very far." The blonde stared down at his hands and sighed. "I got very strong very fast at the time, and I was quickly assigned to certain exorcist groups and was sent out to missions. Things spun out of control, and I lost track of you." "How did you feel when you saw me again?" asked Akeno softly. "I wasn't sure if it was you at first when I saw you standing next to Ria's grimoire, but when I realized it was you, and I was very surprised." Naruto stepped closer to Akeno again and was happy she didn't move away. "I never thought I would see you again after so long, but my feelings started to bubble back up to the surface as I thought about you. I knew that I was on a mission and that you are a devil, but I couldn't help but reach out to you and get to know the real you." The blonde looked down to the ground and fidgeted a little. "I'm really sorry I created such an awkward and difficult situation, but can you please forgive me? I want us to have friendly relationship." Without another word, Akeno rushed forward and jumped into Naruto's chest. Tears came rushing out of her eyes as she wrapped her arms around him as tightly as she could, as if he would vanish if she was a second too late. She pressed her cheek against the top of his chest and relished in the warmth that he provided her. "You are just as important to me," Akeno choked out between sobs. "You are just as important to me." Naruto was surprised to see Akeno act this way, but wrapped his arms around her shaking frame. She appeared to be very delicate in his arms, as if she would break if he would so much as pull away a little. Her body was smaller than what Naruto expected, and she fitted in his arms very well, like two pieces of a puzzle. "I really don't care that you are a devil. I have enough experience to say that it is not the individual factions that make good and evil. Even if we are supposed to be enemies, I will always be your friend." Naruto hugged Akeno tighter as he spoke. "I want to be your friend. I will never let you go," said Akeno in a high of emotions. The new knowledge of Naruto valuing her just as she valued him amplified her feelings greatly, and she wanted to keep him by her side no matter what. "I don't care if you are an exorcist, I am keeping you with me from now on, even if I have to force Ria's evil pieces into you." Naruto remained silent to her words. He didn't want to think about the problems that may arise very soon. All he wanted to do was to enjoy a moment together with Akeno, something that he had been dreaming about since he was a young child. Once again, morning had broken and the sun illuminated the mostly peaceful town. Many people were already filling the streets trying to make it to their work on time and were oblivious to the fact that all of them could have been killed by a crazed fallen angel just a little over a day ago. Thanks to the efforts of the student council of Kuo Academy, all traces of the battle with Kokabiel were destroyed and all damages were fixed. No one would even know of the event. The lone ray of sunlight peeked through the curtains of a certain apartment and landed on the twitching eyes of Namikaze Naruto. The man groaned as he turned his head to the side, but he could still feel the slight heat on his face. With a slight brush of his hand, a small wind suddenly brushed against his curtains and closed it completely, shutting most of the light from the room. "Damn, now I'm awake." Naruto rubbed his eyes to clear his vision before looking at the cute smiley face watch that was on his wrist and saw that it was only 6:30 in the morning. He had another hour and a half before he would have to be at school. A small smile came onto his face as he stared at the smiley face on his watch. In the past 36 hours, he had grown attached to the watch again. He even left it on his wrist as he slept. The blonde couldn't help but feel a jolt of happiness as he thought back to the 3 hours he spent with Akeno the previous night. After they calmed down from the reconciliation, Akeno made a steaming pot of tea inside the shrine and they talked. The 3 hours of talking went by like a few minutes. Topics were flying through their minds as they just enjoyed each other's company, and it felt much better than before when they still had to keep their affiliation a secret. Naruto caught a glimpse of the real Akeno last night and he really liked her. Unlike when she was a child, she was talkative and confident. Naruto could no longer see the once timid Akeno in her. She has been replaced by a smart and strong young woman. "Akeno-chan," Naruto whispered to himself as he smiled. "Wow," Naruto said a sudden voice from next to Naruto as he jolted in shock. "Thinking about me so early in the morning?" "Akeno-chan," cried the blonde as he edged to the far side of his bed in shock. Completely hidden from his senses was Akeno, a completely naked Akeno, who was lying next to him on his own bed under the covers. She giggled at his shock as she let the blanket slide off her shoulder to reveal her creamy white skin and bodacious assets. "For the strongest exorcist, I expected you to wake up when I snuck into your bed, but apparently my stealth is better than your senses." Naruto felt a trickle of blood drip from his nose as his eyes involuntarily stare at Akeno's wonderful and cute pink dot. At the same time he was cursing his own habit of only sleeping in his boxers, which now resembled a very tall tent. He couldn't believe someone managed to sneak inside his home and slide into bed with him without him sensing anything. He was beginning to wonder if he had extremely underestimated Akeno's prowess as a devil. What the hell, Akeno-chan?" cried the man with a rosy blush on his face. Akeno gave Naruto a saucy grin as she slid closer to him and pressed herself against chest. "After you left the shrine last night I couldn't sleep, so I followed your energy signature and came here." Naruto swallowed hard as he felt Akeno's harden against his pectorals. "But you were already sound asleep when I got here, so I decided to join you." The blonde managed a small smile and tried to move back, but he was already at the edge. "But why did you take all your clothes off?" Akeno smirked and rested her head on Naruto's shoulder. "It's all thanks to Rias. When we were younger we shared a room together and she would always say that sleeping in the nude is a lot more comfortable, and I eventually got the same habit." Naruto groaned when Akeno brushed her leg against his thighs. "I can't sleep unless I'm nude, so sorry if this makes you feel awkward." "Then not at all," mumbled Naruto as all of his blood rushed to his head. The thought of Akeno and Rias sleeping together naked really wasn't helping. "I would usually only share a bed with Rias because I only sleep in the nude, but you are my cute childhood friend, so I don't mind you seeing me like this." Akeno was having the time of her life seeing Naruto blush and stutter like a young teenager and decided to push him even further. "Wow, Naruto, you are very red. Is this perhaps the first time you've seen a girl's naked body?" "You know I grew up in the Vatican, right?" muttered Naruto looking even more embarrassed than before. Akeno giggled and nodded. Oh I know, but I thought you would have had some sexual experience with maybe a female exorcist during missions. I was 8 years old when I started to do missions, and everyone was at least 10 years older than me. So you are still a pure boy, huh? Teased Akeno as she snuggled deeper against Naruto. Well you're not alone, I am also a virgin. Oh really, that's great. Why, do you want my first time? Naruto's heart was beating like he had just finished killing 1,000 monsters. We are close childhood friends, how about we swap virginities with each other, I know it will be fun. Oh lord, what is happening to me? Cried Naruto inwardly as he tried to stay focused. Thank the Lord that I am not an angel yet, because I would have fallen right there and then. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, knocking Naruto out of his stupor. Naruto-senpai, I am making breakfast, do you want anything? Zenobia asked, oblivious to the scene behind the door. Then no thank you, Zenobia, I am going to leave in a little while. Okay then, I will see you at school later. Before he slept last night, Naruto had arranged for Zenobia to enroll in Kuo Academy for the moment, and the headmaster was very willing to accept his request. It seemed that he was also under the devil's jurisdiction. So you live with Zenobia, said Akeno, looking more serious than before. What kind of relationship do the two of you have? She's my junior and my student right now. Naruto was a little surprised by the tone of her question, he sensed a small hint of fear and worry. Akeno had a smile on her face again as she sat up on the bed, which allowed Naruto a sigh of relief. Okay then, since you won't have breakfast here, how about we go to the cafe and grab a coffee? Sure, just let me get dressed. Naruto stepped out of his bed and made sure to pin his arousal away from the eyes of Akeno. He grabbed his clothes on his dresser, which was just across from his bed. He actually wanted to go to class today, so he started to slip into his uniform, which he didn't mind at all. Then he looked up at the small mirror that was on top of his dresser, and he felt some blood trickle down his nose again. Akeno was also dressing, and when he saw her reflection she was bending over to put on a very sexy black thong, and it gave him the perfect view of her plump behind and beautiful womanhood. His hand stopped as he was buttoning up his shirt, and his eyes were locked onto her, bouncing as she stood back up. Hey, suddenly said Akeno as Naruto jolted in shock. Can you come help me? Asked the girl, gesturing to her bra. Naruto was hoping that his slacks were enough to hide his erection as he turned around and walked over to Akeno. She had a very pretty smile on her face as he stood behind her, and it made him feel even more nervous. His hands held onto the straps and he carefully clipped them together, all the while taking in her wonderful scent and noticing how smooth and creamy her skin looked. Akeno noticed his stares and smiled before she walked over to the bed to put on her other clothes. Naruto couldn't help but stare again at her as she buttoned up her shirt and stepped into her skirt. It was the sexiest thing he had ever seen in his life. Akeno was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. He had noticed at the moment he saw her again, but he didn't expect her to be so seductive. In his eyes, Akeno was classy, elegant and beautiful, but this morning showed to him a side of her than he didn't see before. The sexy and playful girl who was quite confident in her body. Even in her usual school uniform, Akeno looked gorgeous, especially with her hair down. You look beautiful with your hair down. Naruto couldn't help but tell her his opinion. Akeno turned around and smiled at him. Thank you. The blonde walked over and picked up the orange ribbon from the bed. How about you keep your hair down today? Then what about the ribbon? Naruto smiled and just shrugged. You don't have to wear it every day. Akeno smiled and back and nodded, sure, why not? She carefully rolled the ribbon around her finger and stored it inside her blazer pocket. She closed-buttoned the pocket to make sure it wouldn't fall out during the day. Let's go. The blonde chuckled and held out his hand. I placed a marker at school. Akeno looked confused as she took his hand. What does that even mean? Sounds failed to come out of the girl's mouth as she was suddenly standing at the front entrance of her school. It all happened too quickly. It was as if they were standing still, and it was the world that moved. Naruto chuckled at the shocked look on Akeno's face and lightly brushed his finger on her chin. Hey, don't look so surprised. Looking around, Naruto saw that his assumption was true and nobody was around to see him magically appear. It was far too early for anyone to be at the front entrance. Wow! Exclaimed Akeno as she looked up at Naruto. So that's what your teleportation spell is like. Yep, pretty cool, huh? The girl laughed lightly as she stepped back. Cool. I can't believe it. Naruto chuckled at her reaction. I didn't even feel us move, it was like using a teleportation circle, but it was instantaneous. Akeno wrapped her arms around Naruto's and smiled. So that is what being the Kiroi Senko feels like. The blonde chuckled again and led the girl towards the direction of the cafe. Come on, the cafe should be open by now. Naruto noticed the obvious changes in Akeno's demeanor around him. She was no longer nervous or reserved. He was very happy to discover such a happy and free-spirited side of Akeno, and he hoped she would always act like that to him. Unknown to both Naruto and Akeno, hovering far above them was Azazel, and he was suppressing his power to avoid being sensed. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Akeno and Naruto being so close to each other. Naruto-san, what do you want with Akeno? It was almost 8:30 and many students were making their way to class, but most of them looked at the front balcony of the school as they passed by. Everyone was surprised to see one of the two great ladies of Kuo Academy leaning on the railing while looking out to the distance. Her red hair framed her face elegantly as her blue eyes scanned the area for something. Rias said someone from behind the Grimory girl and she looked back to see her childhood friend walking over to her. "Good morning, Sona. Why are you standing here?" asked the student council president, who was a little annoyed at the people on the main floor staring up at them. She knew most of the boys down there were trying to sneak a peek at their panties, which fortunately were safely blocked from view. Rias sighed as she rubbed her temples. "I'm waiting to see if Akeno will come to class today. She is still acting weird after the Kokabiel incident." Sona crossed her arms and stood beside her friend. "I heard, did you see her last night?" The Satyria heiress was also quite worried. She and Akeno were very good friends in private and she didn't like that fact that she couldn't do anything to help. "No," muttered Rias a little concerned. "I went to the shrine last night to comfort her, but when I got there it was empty." Sona also felt a little disturbed at the new information inside. "I tried to sense her magic signature, but for some reason she was deliberately hiding her aura and I couldn't find her." Being the pragmatist that she was, Sona placed a hand on Ria's shoulder before she spoke. "This doesn't look good at all. Instead of waiting for her to show herself, we should go look for her right now." "I think that's a good idea." Suddenly, some commotion caught the attention of the two heiresses and made them look down to the main floor. Some last-minute students were walking into the school and they were all staring at the front entrance as they whispered to each other. Sona and Rias looked over at whatever caught the students' attention and were very surprised also, but for a different reason. Now walking through the main door of the school was Akeno with her arms wrapped tightly against Naruto's own. Everyone could see that the blonde's arm was being hugged between Akeno's bodacious, and Naruto himself had a small smile on his face. They were still engaged in their own conversation and basically ignored everything that was around them, which was probably for the best. "Well, this is certainly a surprise." Sona narrowed her eyes at the sight and grew suspicious of Naruto's motives towards her friend. "Come on." Rias quickly turned around and made her way down the stairs with Sona right beside her. They both set their sights on Akeno and Naruto and walked straight up to them. Other students slowed down to see the sight, which Rias ignored, but Sona, being the president that she was, gave them a stern stare and all of them quickly dispersed. Akeno was unaware of her two best friends coming over to her direction and was smiling up at Naruto happily. After the conversation in the shrine last night, Akeno banished all negative thoughts about Naruto and promised herself that she would keep him by her side, no matter what. She was sure that Naruto would want the same thing she did. After all, they were both very important to each other. Naruto may still be an exorcist, but she would persuade him to join into Ria's peerage, and by his reaction to her body in the morning, it would not be a very hard task for her. "Why do you even want to come to class today?" asked Akeno as she tugged on Naruto's arm. Naruto smiled down at his friend and shrugged lightly. "I never get to enjoy normal life like this back home, so I want to savor it." The blonde chuckled as he absent-mindedly leaned closer to Akeno. "Schools back in Vatican City are incredibly prestigious and wealthy, and I either go there or someone would have a private tutor teach me these things, so classroom like these are much needed breaths of fresh air. Since you like it here so much," started Akeno a little hesitantly. "How long are you going to stay here?" Naruto's eyes softened at the nervousness he saw in Akeno's eyes. "I am really not sure. I will be here for at least a week more, but I would have to leave when Michael-sama assigns me another mission." Akeno looked away from Naruto's eyes and nodded. "I see." The blonde felt a little guilty and pulled her closer. "Akeno-chan, Akeno," said a familiar voice that interrupted Naruto before he could finish. "What are you doing?" Rias stood in front of the two entwined people with a very serious expression on her face. Her eyes were locked onto their very close frames and she grew very dubious of Naruto's motives towards her best friend. Akeno gave Rias her usual smile and waved her off. "Nothing, I was just enjoying breakfast with Naruto-kun." Sona walked up to the group after she made sure the halls were scarce of students. "Please answer honestly, Akeno, you know exactly what we are asking." Akeno narrowed her eyes at her friends. "And I told you, I was spending some time with Naruto-kun." She disentangled her arms with Naruto's and stood in front of him. "Why are you two interrogating me like this?" "Yes," started Naruto as he stood behind Akeno with a hand on her shoulder. "Akeno-chan was just having breakfast with me, and I believe I have told you quite clearly yesterday, Rias-san, I will not harm anyone in this town, especially not Akeno-chan." Rias marched up to her queen and pulled her into her arms. "Sorry Naruto-san, but I require the help of Akeno for now, so please excuse us." With a snap of her fingers, a red magic circle appeared below their feet. "Do not worry, this won't take long." "Rias, what are you doing?" asked Akeno looking back at her friend. "Just come with me." The magic circle vanished as the two were teleported from the school lobby, leaving Naruto alone with Sona. Naruto sighed as he placed his hands in his pockets. "Are you all still worried that I will harm Akeno-chan?" Sona adjusted her glasses and shook her head. We are well aware of the relationship you have with Akeno, but seeing how you are an exorcist and she is a devil, I believe a safe distance must be kept between the two of you. The Satori walked closer to Naruto and looked up at him. Our separate factions are still very sensitive about our kinds mingling with each other, so please be mindful of our situation, Naruto-san. I am well aware of the current situation and the implications of me associating with Akeno-chan, and that is precisely why I am confused about your trying to separate us. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the young lady and crossed his arms. Akeno-chan is a low-class devil, and not anyone who originated from any prestigious devil family. What dire situation could possibly arise from her being close to me? The blonde walked closer to Sona as he spoke. I highly doubt that the Satans would start a war with us because of one devil being friends with me, and Rias-san doesn't look like she would banish her best friend because of me, so what is the huge problem here? The problem is how differently Akeno had been acting ever since you showed up here, said Sona with much more emotion than before. It is almost as if she has become obsessed with you, someone who is our enemy by nature and is her closest friends. We are very concerned about her. Sona activated her own magic circle under her feet as she narrowed her eyes at Naruto. If you truly care for her, then please let us figure out what is happening to her right now. Naruto watched Sona disappear with her magic circle as he sighed. This is getting quite complicated. What are you doing, Rias? Exclaimed Akeno as she emerged from the magic circle and arrived at the club room. Rias saw that the room was empty before she walked over to Akeno and sat her down on the couch. I should be asking you the same thing. The red-haired girl looked concerned as she held her best friend by her shoulders. What are you doing with Naruto-san? Don't you know he is one of our greatest enemies? What are you saying? Asked Akeno looking a little angry. His mission here is over and he has no reason to harm us. Then what about later into the future? Demanded Rias loudly. He is the Kiroi Senko and his job is to kill us. Akeno recoiled a little but still had an angry look on her face. What if his next mission is to exterminate us? What do you think he'll do then? Akeno bit her lower lip and grasped onto Ria's hands. I know, that is why I am trying to persuade him over to our side. Rias looked a little surprised as she stayed silent. You still have a few pieces left to use, so why not use them on Naruto-kun? Rias looked at her queen incredulously. This is crazy, Akeno. That plan was before we knew he is the Kiroi Senko. There is no way he will join us right now, and even if he did, my pieces wouldn't be strong enough. I don't care, there has to be a way. Akeno looked very troubled. I am just as important to him as he is to me, so I am sure he would want to stay here with me. She grasped onto Ria's hands tighter as she looked into her eyes. I know how crazy this sounds and how selfish I am acting, but I want to keep Naruto-kun in my life. Akeno, Rias whispered softly. I've never felt so strongly about anyone before. I know it sounds really crazy, but it's the truth. Akeno thought back to how safe she felt when Naruto hugged her last night and how warm she was when she snuggled up to him on the bed. I need him with me, Akeno, said a different voice from the side of the room, and Rias and Akeno looked over to see Sona walking over to them. Are you feeling okay? Asked a Satori heiress as she sat down on the other side of Akeno. Akeno sighed exhaustively and closed her eyes. For goodness sake, I'm fine. Why are the two of you making such a big deal out of this? Because you act like you are in love with him, cried Rias loudly. A quick silence came over Akeno as she tried to find a proper retort, but none was coming to her. Was she in love with Naruto? That question bounced around her head as the quick realization came over her. She was in love with Namikaze Naruto. But then another question followed. Was she in love with the real Namikaze Naruto, or just the one she conjured in her mind? For years she had been thinking about the artificial Naruto in her mind. Could she have just replaced the real one with the fake one? She didn't really know the real Naruto that well, but he made her feel very safe and warm and even loved. Sona saw confusion, then frustration come only Akeno as she thought over her situation rationally, perhaps for the first time since she saw Naruto again. I know you both care a lot for each other, but think this through, Akeno, Sona said calmly as she clutched her friend's arm. He is one of the leaders of the church, and if you were to fall in love with him, the implications can really go either way. Rias wanted to be fair and spoke up. Your relationship may also be a bridge between our two factions, but this whole thing is a coin toss, and the outcome can never be predicted. Akeno's head was down as she stared at her hands. I can tell how much he affects you, but honestly, I don't know if I can trust him yet. Rias sighed before she continued. He is someone who had killed thousands of our comrades before, and even though he saved us from Kokabiel, I find him quite mysterious. We understand that as opposing forces, he would naturally have an inclination to hide his powers from us, but don't you think that he acts way too relaxed around us? Sona said as she held Akeno's shoulders. He is definitely strong enough to fend all of us off easily, but still a man of his position would receive highly controversial comments if anyone finds out he is closely associating with a devil. Is he so confident that he wouldn't care about his own superiors in the Vatican? Rias nodded at her childhood friend's words. Why would he openly desire to be with you when he works for such a strict organization? Because he is lonely, said Akeno suddenly and without thought. Excuse me? Asked Sona a little confused. I saw it in his eyes. Akeno looked up from her lap and to her friends. Naruto-kun was alone when he grew up, he had no friends close to him and he was sent out on missions when he was 8 years old. Rias listened very carefully at the new information. He told me that he never had any close friends with him, everyone he worked with was much older than he was and everyone his age would never be sent on high-class missions with him. Akeno pulled out the orange ribbon from her pocket and held it in her hand. I am the only one who he could consider a friend all those years ago and he wants to thank me for it after all this time. Rias and Sona stayed silent but was still a little dubious about the whole thing. After all, Naruto could have made all that up. I know that this is going way too fast and I do plan to find out what he really is like now, but please trust me when I am doing this. Akeno smiled as she held Sona and Ria's hands. I know you two are worried about me and only want the best for me, but I believe Naruto-kun is right for me, so relax. Rias closed her eyes before she smiled. I guess that's okay, but be careful. Warned Sona, still looking very concerned. Akeno smiled happily at her best friends. I will. Both Rias and Sona weren't happy about Naruto being so close to Akeno, but if asked, they would have to admit that they had never seen Akeno so happy before. Kuo Academy was much more crowded than usual, and the courtyard was almost too clustered for comfort. It was the annual Parents' Day, and many older humans were dressed up classily to see their children grind away at their education. The school had been prepping Parents' Day for a long while, and the student council had placed a lot of effort into it, and it had certainly paid off. The courtyard was decorated with plain but interesting banners of freshly thought-up slogans to the parents, and the caterers, unlike previous years according to some students, were on time with good quality food. Naruto was one of the first people to be at the school in the morning because of his responsibility as the school conductor. He stood on an elegant black podium as soon as it was 8 o'clock and made sure that the parents were welcomed into the school with some grand music. The rest of the orchestra was perched upon an elevated stage in the middle of the courtyard. Thankfully the weather was very nice and there was a little amount of wind to relieve everyone of the heat from the sun. The blonde had personally picked out the pieces the band would be playing and judging by the amount of parents that decided to crowd around the school band, his choices were good. They've gotten better, thought Naruto as he looked over at his flute section. The young exorcist felt no difference between using his baton and his kusanagi as both of them coordinated his influence over the physical realm. With a flick of the wrist, Naruto could completely shift the dynamics of his band or destroy a small army with his power, both of which include the same principle. With a gradual decrease in his movements, Naruto slowed the band down to a full stop and allowed silence to reign in the crowded courtyard. He smiled at his band members and many of them returned the gesture, all happy their performance had attracted so much attention. Naruto turned back to face his audience with great confidence and smiled as he gave them a polite bow. Thank you for listening to us. Applause almost instantly shrouded the area as the parents gave their token of appreciation to the school band, which, in the majority's opinion, was much better than before. Many could still remember the middle-aged, extremely tan Japanese lady with white blonde hair conducting the band. Their performance had more dissonance than a modern construction site. Everyone was surprised the school got rid of the strange lady and hired a young student to replace her, but was all pleasantly glad that the young man did such a good job. The band sounded better than ever. Naruto turned back to his hand and lifted his hands into the air, which was a gesture to the members, indicating that they could all rise and leave the stage. One by one, each student filed off the stage and quietly into the school to change back into their normal school uniforms. Many of the students needed to find their parents inside their homeroom class. Naruto remained on his podium until all of his members had gone, which was taking a little longer than usual, since many of the members, particularly the girls, smiled brightly at Naruto before they left, stalling their movements a little. That was very good, Naruto-senpai. Walking off the podium, Naruto smiled at his junior and student. Thank you, Zenobia, I hope you liked it. The blue-haired girl nodded with a smile. I really liked it, it was almost as good as the performance you did back in Vatican City. The Kiroi Senko's face wasn't well known, even back in Vatican City, and sometimes he would take the place of the normal conductor of the official Vatican orchestra and host several performances of his own. People would usually be confused as to why there was a teenager conducting one of the best orchestras in the world. Come on, let's go inside. Naruto said as he led his student into the school. It had been a week since the Kokabiel incident and Naruto had gotten quite accustomed to being a student and associating with people his own age. He would mostly be seen walking around the school and having lunch with Akeno, but Zenobia would sometimes follow them if she was free. The two devil groups in the school seemed to have become more relaxed with his presence, but he could sometimes still see Rias Gremory or Sona Satiri looking at him from afar while he was with Akeno. It was a little annoying to Akeno, but he was fine with it for the most part. It was very nice to know that Akeno had such caring friends. Naruto-senpai, the meeting will happen tomorrow night, right? Asked Zenovia looking rather serious. Naruto looked much more casual as he smiled at some parents that nodded at him. Yes, Michael-sama should be here around tomorrow morning, but he had said that we wouldn't need to meet with him until later in the evening. The blonde looked down at his student and smiled at her expression. Are you nervous about meeting Michael-sama? Zenovia blushed in embarrassment and looked away slightly. Maybe a little bit. I've heard many stories about the Archangel Michael, but I never thought I'd meet him so soon. The blonde chuckled a little and patted her head. Don't worry, Michael-sama is a very polite and peaceful person, and he takes very good care of his subordinates. Zenovia nodded back silently, but was a little surprised when she felt a large group of devils ahead of them. She looking ahead and saw the Gremory group and the Satiri group all standing at the end of the school lobby, but there were several new faces with them. Two of them had crimson red hair just like Rias Gremory, but were both men and looked older than her. There was a woman standing next to the younger crimson-haired man, and she was dressed as a maid, looking very professional. There was also a very peculiar character standing next to the student council president. She was wearing some sort of magical girl outfit and had a very childish face, but looking at her full body, she was a grown woman without a doubt. Zenovia started Naruto very seriously, which surprised the girl a little. Stay very quiet and stand behind me. Naruto, of course, had seen those faces before, almost too often in his opinion. It was hard to believe in such a small town in the middle of Japan would house so many powerful beings. Not only did Azazel, the governor of the fallen angels, live here, it was also the occasional home for two of the four Satans. Surzich's Lucifer and Seraphol Leviathan. Naruto had researched quite extensively on the Satans and their powers, and both Satans in front of him were undoubtedly very powerful. The other two devils present were no joke also, only of them was the current head of the Gremory family, and the other was Graphia Lucifuge, a devil whose strength that rivaled Seraphol Leviathan. The blonde's eyes surveyed the group of devils ahead. He could see Rias and Sona both looking at him as usual, but their servants looked a little nervous, which was understandable. His eyes finally landed on Akeno, someone who had become extremely close and precious to him in very little time. She looked rather emotionless as she stood beside Rias, but he could see from her eyes that she was concerned about him, but he only smiled as he walked up to the group. Surzich's was the only one who stepped forward to greet Naruto. Hello there. Said the man rather happily. It is very nice to finally meet you, I am Surzich's. The red Satan had a friendly smile on his face as he extended his hand to the young man. Naruto confidently shook hands with who was possibly his worst enemy and smiled at him. It is nice to meet you too, I am Namikaze Naruto. The blonde gestured to Zenovia, who was behind him sporting a shocked expression after hearing the man's name. And this is my subordinate, Zenovia. Hello to you too, Zenovia, Durandal wielder. The girl managed a curt nod. Nice to meet you. Surzich's gestured back to his family and friends and walked back to them. Along with Naruto had Zenovia, and Akeno was staring at the blonde man as he walked up to them. I believe you already know most of my family and friends here, but let me introduce. The red-haired man smiled as he gestured to the magical girl next to him. This is Seraphol Leviathan, my colleague, this is my father, Lord Gremory, and this is my wife, Graphia. Naruto smiled and nodded. It is very nice to meet you, Seraphol Dono. Gremory Dono. Lord Gremory smiled and gave a curt nod, but Naruto was much more amused to see Seraphol twirl around in her outfit and struck a pose. It is nice to see you again, Graphia-san. Naruto said as he looked over at the silver-haired woman whom he had seen 3 years ago in Spain. Graphia looked back rather emotionally and gave a polite bow. Yes, I see you have changed in 3 years, Namikaze Dono. The last time Graphia saw Naruto was 3 years ago in Spain, and their meeting lasted a few minutes at most after Naruto destroyed the Yokai army. The woman's memory showed her a younger-looking Naruto who was at least 5 inches shorter than he was today. Yes, I finally finished puberty. Naruto joked with a calm smile on his face. Surzich's chuckled and looked back at Naruto. I must thank you, Naruto-san, for saving my sister and her family from Kokabiel. We were very fortunate to have you present at the time. There is no need, Surzich's Dono, dealing with Kokabiel was a part of my own mission. Naruto smiled at the Satan, who was much different from what he had imagined. I must apologize for involving Ria-san and Sona-san into the whole ordeal. I should have handled the situation much sooner than I did. The important thing is that everyone is safe. It was Seraphol who said this as she hopped forward. If it wasn't for you, my cute little Sona-chan would have been hurt and I would have charged straight at Azazel for revenge. Seraphol was twirling her magic stick around as she spoke, and Naruto chuckled at her strange behavior. So Naruto stated more casually than before. It is nice for you all to be here for Parents' Day. I really wasn't expecting any of you until tomorrow night. Surziches and Serafal both smiled and nodded. Well, since I am usually very busy, this is a nice chance for me to see my little sister in her school. The Satan smiled back at Rias, who gave her brother a soft smile as well. Two birds with one stone, I guess. Yeah, I haven't seen Sona-chan in so long, I was dying from missing her so much. Much to Sona's horror, Serafal pounced at her and pulled her into a crushing hug. Sona-chan grew up so much in such little time, Wani-chan is very sad I missed it. With a terrible blush on her face, Sona tried to push her sister away. Oh Wani-sama, please stop it. Rias, her peerage, along with Sona's own peerage, couldn't help but cringe a little at Serafal's behavior. It was one thing to act so childishly when it was only them, but to do so in front of the Kiroi Senko was highly inappropriate. Surziches chuckled at the typical scene before he turned back to Naruto. So, are any of your relatives coming today? Naruto smiled and shook his head. No, my parents have passed away a long time ago. The Kiroi Senko was cut off from his sentence as someone suddenly jumped onto his back and wrapped their legs around his waist. Two very big and soft mounds planted themselves against his back as a pair of arms was almost crushing his windpipe. Some silky blonde hair mixed with Naruto's own as a delightful smell of roses filled his senses. Naruto-chan. Zenovia, along with all the devils, were all silent as they stared at the stunned look on Naruto's face. The Kiroi Senko, the man who slain thousands of yokai, devils and fallen angels, had a growing blush on his face as his body was flung from side to side as the woman on his back twisted around. Rias along with most of her peerage, mainly Issei, were shocked to see such a scene, but the Securite was mostly thinking of how sexy the woman looked. Sona and her peerage were also very shocked, and the former was thinking the scene was rather familiar. The one person who was really acting different from the rest was Akeno. She had a look of fury in her eyes as she looked at the beautiful woman hug her Naruto-kun from behind and even ride on his back. She felt a large surge of anger and jealousy arose from deep inside her, and some lightning started to gather around her hands. G. Gabriel Nichan, cried Naruto as the woman jumped off of his back. The Seraph Gabriel, the second in command in heaven, was dressed in a beautiful white sundress. It was held up by two thin straps and revealed a decent amount of her enormous, which became the center of attention of many people around the lobby. Her hair had its usual style of being curled at the tip, but there was no halo on top of her head and her 10 white wings were all hidden from view. She had a bright smile on her face as she grabbed Naruto's face, which was quite tall, considering that he was at least 8 inches taller than her, and pulled it down to her chest. She wrapped her arms tightly around him again and smothered his face deeper into her cleavage. Gabriel! Exclaimed Rias in surprise, the angel Gabriel. Zenovia was also in shock as she stared at the scene from behind Naruto. She's Gabriel-sama. Asia looked very shocked as she looked at the beautiful lady in front of her. She had seen countless paintings and statues of Gabriel before, but none of them did her justice. She really was the most beautiful woman in heaven. Akeno's finger was twitching in irritation as sparks of lightning zapped randomly. He called her Ni-chan, so this should be fine, but why the hell is she shoving his face in her ass? Naruto, with great difficulty, pulled away from the hug and held Gabriel at arm's length. He was rather out of breath. Gabriel's, which were almost as big as Akeno's, completely blocked all oxygen from his mouth and nostrils. He had almost forgotten how affectionate Gabriel would be to him. A few years ago when he was a young boy, she would come visit him almost every day and he almost suffocated almost every time. Gabriel Nichan, what are you doing here? Asked Naruto with a sigh. Gabriel had a bright grin on her face as she held her hands together. I heard that this school was doing a parents' day for all the students, so as your older sister I came here to visit you. Gabriel lightly smacked Naruto on his chest and looked up at him sternly. You should have told me about this when you called last night. If you did then I wouldn't have to rush here this morning. Rias did a double take as she watched the scene. It was highly amusing and very familiar. I didn't think you would want to come, Naruto muttered looking pretty embarrassed. I am technically still on a mission and Michael-sama is coming tomorrow night. I have to prepare for his arrival. The blonde really didn't want to deal with Gabriel at the moment, not with two of the Satans just a few feet away from them. Oh, so you want Michael to come and not me? Gabriel pouted a little and glared up at Naruto. Have you forgotten who played with you all those times when you were a child and who cooked for you every night when you were sick? Naruto sighed and shook his head. No, I remember it perfectly, Ni-chan. Good. Exclaimed Gabriel as she crossed her arms. Now next time remember to tell me about these events. The angel shook her head at Naruto. Griselda is right, you tend to forget things if it isn't in a mission. I should tell her to remind you next time something like this happens. Naruto sighed, two of the most demanding and scary women in his life teaming up was definitely not a good thing. Gabriel Dono, it's nice to see you again. The blonde beauty turned around to see Surziches smiling at her and she returned the gesture. Hello Surziches Dono, I see you have come here for your sister. Gabriel, when talking to the Satan, looked much more reserved and serious compared to talking with her little brother. The Satan nodded politely. Yes, since I was coming here for the meeting anyway, I thought I'd come to see my sister on Parents' Day, which I only found out because of Grafia monitoring the school. Serziches turned around and smiled at Rias. My sister didn't tell me anything about this either. Rias turned away with a small blush. Gabriel sighed and nodded. So you know how I feel these kids can be so inconsiderate. She turned a little to see Serafal, who had a smirk on her face as she looked at the angel. Hello again, Serafal. Don't know, it has been a while since the last time we met. Yes, but this time seems much friendlier. Last time we almost destroyed a human country. The rivalry between Gabriel and Serafal was known to only a few people, but it would be quite apparent if one was to see them together. Yes, I see you have changed your appearance since the last time we met. Gabriel eyed the strange magical girl cosplay her rival was wearing. That outfit looks interesting. Serafal smirked and nodded. Yes, this is my favorite magical girl outfit and I will wear it the next time we fight. Serziches stepped in before the two women actually started fight and smiled at Gabriel. So, is Namikaze-san here your actual brother? Everyone became rather silent at the question. They wondered if Naruto was so powerful because he was the brother of the Seraphs and was actually an angel. Akeno, for one, was quite afraid of the answer. No, I was the one who monitored Naruto-chan when he was a young boy and he became my surrogate little brother. Gabriel smiled and ruffled Naruto's hair, a task which she had to reach up to do. He was so young when I started to take care of him, nothing like how he is now. The Devil Group, particularly Rias, Akeno and the rest of the Grimmery peerage, looked surprised at how friendly and familiar Naruto was to Gabriel. She really was treating him like a little boy. He grew up so quickly. Naruto sighed and lightly removed his sister's hand from his hair. We should start heading to the classroom. Yes, class will start very soon. Sona nodded at her peerage, and they broke off into small groups to leading the parents and family to the various classrooms around the school. Unfortunately, Naruto, Akeno, Rias and Sona were all in the same class, so Serziches, Lord Grimmery, Grafia, Serafal, and Gabriel would be stuck together for the rest of the day. The mood between the faction leaders seemed very friendly and casual, but if there was any sort of conflict, a sudden battle may break out. Naruto closed his eyes as he made his way to his classroom, along with the rest of the group. The silent tension was seemingly increasing by the second. He knew that if a battle were to break out, he would have to immediately place Gabriel's safety as top priority. The devils had more numbers on their side, and almost all of them were ultimate class devils or satans, so Naruto might have to teleport Gabriel back to heaven to escape. Naruto-kun whispered a soft voice from next to Naruto, which he immediately recognized as Akeno. With a smile on his face, Naruto looked over at his friend. Hey, this is quite a turnout, huh? Looking around, Naruto found that he and Akeno were a little isolated from the rest of the group. Serziches, Serafal, and Gabriel were still engaged in small talk a little ahead of the group. Grafia and her father-in-law was a little behind them, and the only ones at the back were Akeno and Naruto. He was glad they had a little privacy, if only for a few minutes. He wanted to speak to Akeno before they made it to the classroom. Akeno looked up at Naruto with concern and lightly held onto his arm. Be careful, Naruto-kun. Naruto nodded and smiled. I will, but I'm sure nothing serious will happen here. The blonde smiled brighter as he reached up to brush a strand of hair from Akeno's forehead. You're wearing the ribbon today. Yeah, Akeno replied with a smile. I've grown used to wearing it over the years, to the point where it feels weird if I don't. She looked down at the ground for a few seconds before she looked back into Naruto's eyes. Hey, later tonight, can you come visit me at my shrine? Naruto was a little surprised, but nodded nonetheless. Sure. The young man gently grabbed Akeno's hand, which was still on his arm, and planted her palm against his own. Akeno was a little confused as to what he was doing. She couldn't feel anything, but when she pulled her hand back, she saw a strange mark the size of a coin on her palm. This is one of my markers. Whenever you want to see me, just channel some magical power into that mark and I will be there right away. Akeno smiled at the heartfelt gesture and nodded. This is great, thank you. The walk to the classroom was over and they all settled into their usual desks. Akeno was sitting right in front of Naruto with Rias to her left and Sona to her right. Serziches, along with Serafal, Gabriel, Lord Grimmery and Grafia were all standing at the back of the room. It was very odd for Naruto to see such a strange scene. He never thought that two of the Satans, one of the main four Seraphs, and several ultimate class devils would stand quietly in a classroom watching him, along several young devils, go through a normal day of school. Class went on as it usually did and Naruto took his notes and answered some questions when asked by the teacher, but it was quite boring all the way to the end. The people at the back though, appeared to have a completely different opinion. Serziches, Lord Grimmery and Gabriel all had video cameras recording the classroom and they would look even happier when their respective sibling or child would answer a question. Naruto sighed and lightly shook his head. His sister was always this bubbly and giddy, but he loved her nonetheless. Naruto smiled at the fond memories he shared with his kind and loving sister. In the darkest times of his life, Griselda became his surrogate mother and Gabriel his sister. When he was in desperate need of a family, they came along and gave him one, along with all the love they could possibly muster. Back then, and even now, Gabriel's presence and aura made Naruto feel very safe and loved, feelings that could only be provided by family. Flashback on. Sounds of small blasts of energy could be heard around the small training ground as a small boy stood a few feet away from a series of targets made out of wood. These targets resembled the ones people would shoot at during archery tournaments, but instead of arrows, the boy would blast them with shocks of lightning and destroy them. "Ha!" cried the boy as he fired another shot of lightning at his second last target. The blue energy struck the target at blinding speeds and incinerated the piece of wood to ashes. The boy was panting quite heavily and fell to his knees, there was sweat dripping from his brows and dirt all over his finely tailored clothes. It was nearly nightfall, and the orange sun was beginning to dip more and more into the horizon. The boy knew that he only had a few more minutes before he had to return to his quarters, and he only had one more target to destroy. With a few deep breaths, the boy gathered the last of his strength and stood up on his feet, a determined expression on his face. "Ha!" Another blast of blue lightning shot from his hands and collided with the target, and to the boy's ever relief, it was destroyed just like its 50 other counterparts. With a small smile on his face, the boy sat down on the soft grass and lay down fully on his back. At the very moment, he heard the familiar ringing of the large bells on the clock tower sounding out into the distance, covering every corner of the city of Rome. The bells meant that his day was over and he could return to his quarters to rest. "Oh, there you are," said a sudden voice from behind the boy, breaking the serene silence of the evening. "I thought I told you to rest after yesterday." The boy smiled at the nun who walked over to him with her hands on her hips. "I'm sorry, Griselda Abachan, but I wanted to master my lightning magic sooner." Naruto. Griselda had a small frown on her face. "You're just 8 years old, you don't have to train like this yet." Naruto sat up on the ground as the lady knelt down next to the boy. "You should be in school and make friends with other boys your age." "I don't want to go to those boring classes and the other kids are always scared of me." Naruto crossed his arms as a small pout came on his lips. "They all think I would blow up the classroom or freeze the school if I get mad." Naruto had activated his powers not long ago and he once caused a bolt of lightning to destroy his school's clock tower. It was during mass and everyone in the school saw it happen with their own eyes. Since then Naruto had become a terror to the other kids his age. "But if you keep training like this you'll get hurt." Naruto smirked and patted his chest. "Don't worry about me, Griselda Abachan, I always become stronger after I train, even if I hurt myself, and soon I'll be strong enough to go on high-class missions," exclaimed the boy looking very excited. Griselda sighed and ran her fingers through the boy's blonde hair. "Naruto, you are a child, why don't you leave the monsters and yokai to the adults to deal with?" The woman looked concerned for the child she had come to love dearly. "If your parents were here I know they would agree with me." Naruto's eyes darkened at the mention of his late parents. "The one thing I know is that if I had the power I have now the day they died, I would have been able to save them." The boy's mind trailed back to the scene where an out-of-control car crashed into his parents while they were window shopping, with Naruto himself just a few feet away, a few feet that saved his life. "I could have frozen that car to the ground before it hit them, I could have pulled them back faster than that car could reach us." The sister pulled the boy into a warm hug and gently rubbed his back. "Don't do this to yourself, there was nothing you could do at the time, so do not blame yourself for their deaths." Griselda pulled back from the hug and saw some tears welling in the boy's eyes. She brushed them away with her fingers and kissed him lovingly on the cheek. "All you need to know is that they loved you more than anything and they would want you to live happily." She's right, Naru-chan. A shining beacon of light appeared in the training field and when it died down, Gabriel was standing there with a sad smile on her face. "Gabriel-sama," muttered Griselda as she hugged the boy. "Ni-chan." Gabriel walked over to Naruto as she retracted her 10 angel wings and knelt down in front of him. "Your parents were very good people and I'm sure they are resting peacefully in heaven now." Naruto pulled away from Griselda and grabbed onto Gabriel's hand. "See, can you take me to see them, Ni-chan?" asked the boy with some tears spilling from his eyes. "You are a seraph, right, so can you take me up there and let me see them?" A light sob came out of Naruto. "I really miss my Ka-chan." Gabriel frowned heavily and pulled the boy into a warm hug. "I'm sorry, Naru-chan, but heaven is even bigger than the human world and it would take a long time to find 2 people. Naruto sobbed into Gabriel's chest. "But I promise you that I will have my people search for them for you, the only problem is that it would take some time." Naruto nodded as he pulled back from the hug. "Okay." He looked up at his surrogate sister with his big blue eyes that were filled with tears. Gabriel couldn't help it and pulled him back into a hug. "Please don't cry, Naru-chan, you may have lost your parents, but you still have a family." Griselda stayed silent but nodded with a smile. "I am your older sister and Griselda is your aunt and we both love you very much." "You do?" "Of course we do, you little tyke," replied Griselda happily as she ruffled Naruto's hair. Naruto smiled through his tear and snuggled deeper against Gabriel. I love you too, Ni-chan, Aba-chan. The boy felt more determined than ever before. I promise I will get stronger, I will become the strongest person ever, and I will protect both of you. Griselda's eyes softened, and Gabriel had a teary smile. Okay Naru-chan, we'll hold you to that. Flashback end. Gabriel smiled fondly as she stared at the back of her cute little brother, who was already a full-grown adult. It was surprising for her to see the small boy she used to take care of grow up so quickly. The last 10 years seemed like a few days. She could still remember how worried she was of Naruto and how angry she was at her brother for sending Naruto out on a solo mission when he was only 10 years old. She immediately flew down from the heavens and searched for the boy, but when she had found him he had already completed the mission. You really have become very strong, Naruto-chan may be already the strongest human in the world. Gabriel had closely followed and documented all of Naruto's achievements with the church so far, and he had done so much that he could safely become a seraph without anyone saying anything. I can't wait until you join us in heaven, maybe by then we would have found your parents. The sounds of bells ringing sounded through the silent classroom, and the first thing Gabriel though was that it was the worst bell she had ever heard before, but then she realized that the class was over. Students were immediately packing up and the parents were walking over to their children. She looked over and saw that the two Satans and the other devils had gone to their children, so she also made her way to her brother. It's been a long time since I've seen you in a classroom, Naruto-chan. Chirped Gabriel with a beautiful smile. The blonde smiled back and nodded. Yeah, it is really relaxing after so many years of work. Naruto packed his books into his bag and carried it over his shoulder. So are you coming back to my apartment tonight? I'll cook you dinner. The angel smiled and shook her head. I can't tonight, I have to prepare some things for the meeting tomorrow night and arrange some hotel rooms for Michael and me tomorrow. It's okay, but if you need anything just call for me. Gabriel giggled and nodded. I know you are very strong, Naruto-chan, but I'll be able to protect myself just for tonight. She leaned closer to Naruto and planted a soft kiss on his cheek before pulling back. I'll see you tomorrow night and we'll talk more about your future career then. Naruto smiled and nodded. Okay, see you later, Ni-chan. With that, Angel Gabriel walked out of the classroom with a smile on her face and Naruto was left alone. He looked back at Akeno and the others and saw that they were talking to the Satans and the other devils. With a small smile at Akeno, who was looking over at him, he waved and walked out of the classroom himself. He was a little tired from the boring class and wanted to rest a little before meeting with Akeno at the shrine later. It was night, Naruto had slept a little longer than he had wanted to and was woken up by a soft tingle he would feel when someone was calling him, thought one of his seals. He quickly jumped out of bed and slipped into a pair of simple black jeans, a blue t-shirt and a pair of runners. Without even turning, Naruto teleported to where Akeno was and the next time focused on his surroundings, he was inside some kind of room. Its design was just like the main building of the shrine, which he had spent a few hours in talking with Akeno a few nights ago, but this room was much smaller and dimmer. Instead of several large lanterns, this room only had a couple of candles and there seemed to be some sort of cherry blossom scent filtering around the room. Hey, Naruto-kun, said an extremely sexy and seductive voice from behind Naruto. Do you want something for dessert? The Kiroi Senko turned around and was a little stunned at the sight. The room he was in was actually a bedroom and it had a large futon spread out on the floor. Sitting in the middle of the futon with a white blanket covering her legs was Akeno, wearing a very thin silk kimono, with the obi barely holding the sides together. The loosely tied clothing revealed a lot of Akeno's wonderful, but covered just enough to make Naruto's mind go crazy. Akeno-chan, come here, Naruto-kun. Naruto couldn't help but give in to his desires. He took off his shoes, his shirt and his pants, leaving him only in his boxers, which resembled more of a tent, and stepped into the futon. The sheets were still cold as he lifted them, but it was warm under the covers because of Akeno. Akeno eyes Naruto's wonderfully built body that she had only seen once before and sensually pressed up to his side. Sorry about my state of dress, but I was taking a nap and I just woke up. As she leaned against Naruto, his clothes were being pushed more to the side, revealing just a little of her pink dot. It's okay, you look amazing. Naruto muttered as his eyes guiltily looked down at her exposed body. Akeno reached over to her nightstand and picked up a bowl of sliced up fruit. I didn't have time to bake any actual dessert, but this is better than nothing. She gently picked up a piece of watermelon and lifted it to Naruto's lip. Here, the watermelon is really ripe. Naruto stared down into Akeno's violet eyes as he opened his mouth. The beauty smiled as Naruto started chewing and rubbed her cheek on his shoulder. How does it taste? Very good. Here, have another piece this time. Instead of her fingers, Akeno held the piece of watermelon between her lips and she leaned up to give Naruto a better angle. Naruto's heart rate increased as he opened his mouth and he bit down on the fruit with his lips just millimeters away from Akeno's. They shared the piece of watermelon and both chewed with their eyes locked onto each other. You're right, they are very good. "What are you doing, Akeno-chan?" Akeno suddenly moved from her position and sat herself down on Naruto's lap, letting her plump and soft behind massage his thigh. "I just want you to do me a favor." "What is it?" asked Naruto while looking at Akeno's pink lips. Akeno smiled saucily as he fingers lightly explored Naruto's body. "Make love to me, Naruto-kun." Without any warning, Akeno pressed her lips on Naruto's own and pushed him flat on the futon. She rested her whole body on top of him and rubbed her sensually against his chest. Her tongue flicked and licked his lips until it forced its way into his mouth and she explored around it as she took in his taste. Naruto was in pure euphoria. He had never felt like this before. Akeno pulled back just slightly from the kiss, leaving their lips just barely touching. "Stay with me forever." Before Naruto's mind could even start to think of a response, Akeno initiated another kiss, all the while grinding herself on Naruto's extremely strained boxers. "Akeno-chan."